A young man with violet hair, brimming with an almost unnatural cheer, turned to Rose. "Isn't it a glorious day, Rose? It seems destined to be perfect." He then lifted her hand, lingering in a romantic tableau he'd clearly orchestrated. Rose, standing stiffly beside him, inwardly groaned, but nonetheless requested her brother remove the blindfold covering her eyes. Garnet, for it was indeed her brother, seemed to realize he'd pushed the theatrics a tad too far. "Just a little surprise, my dear sister," he explained, acutely aware of the servants and the butler observing the scene. With a flourish, Garnet swept the blindfold away, revealing Rose's startlingly blue eyes. They blinked in the sudden light. A gasp escaped Rose's lips as she took in the sight before her. A veritable feast of salad. If a meager assortment of mixed carrots, cucumbers, and gherkins could be called a feast, lay spread upon the table. Garnet stood beside it, waxing lyrical about the bounty before them. Through his effusive praise, she gleaned that these were the most precious ingredients, freshly procured by the household staff. Rose stared at the vegetables, speechless. Just then, a servant, seemingly oblivious to the weighty significance of the moment, bustled in with another covered dish. If this was the main course, Rose thought, it surely must be something grander than what was already on display. Even Garnet declared it a special dish, prepared especially for her. The lid was lifted with a flourish, revealing a small, glistening, roasted chicken. Rose's burgeoning hope deflated like a puncture balloon. The chicken, in comparison to the already paltry spread of mixed vegetables, seemed positively minuscule. Garnet, however, clapped with delight at the feast he'd provided for his sister, despite the butler's hushed reminder that applauding during meals was a breach of noble etiquette. Disappointment pricked at Rose, but she knew it was a gesture of love from her brother. He'd been planning this, he informed her, for a whole month. Life, as they say, is a comedy from afar, a tragedy up close. Rose took a tentative bite of the exquisitely presented chicken. A second later, she froze. The chicken was utterly devoid of seasoning, not even a grain of salt. Salt, she realized with a sinking heart, was a luxury their household could no longer afford. If anyone envied the luxurious lives of nobles, Rose thought she could confidently tell them. Not all nobles are born with silver spoons in their mouths. Outwardly, they might possess the trappings of nobility, but inwardly, they could be utterly destitute. Case in point, Rose herself, a penniless duchess. All she possessed now was an impoverished family, a crumbling house, and the hollow title of Duchess of the Garnet family, for the Garnet dukedom was in ruins. Rewind to a week earlier, and our protagonist, in her modern world, had been consumed with envy for the seemingly opulent lives of the aristocracy. Surely, she believed, they didn't have to scrimp and save like she did. Furthermore, nobles were frequently featured in her favorite novel, Mosaic of Emotions. Although the hierarchical system was long gone, the wealthy elite of the 21st century were, in her mind, no different from the nobles depicted in the book. The poor girl yearned to escape her hand-to-mouth existence, burdened by student loans, and live a life of aristocratic elegance and wealth. Lost in this reverie, she hadn't noticed the car speeding towards her. There was only a scream. When she opened her eyes, Rose saw 2 moons hanging in the sky. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Could those be Atna and Jane? The thought struck her with the force of a physical blow. In that instant, she knew exactly where she was. A world with 2 moons, Atna and Jane, existed only in the fictional world of Mosaic of Emotions. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. The maid walking beside her looked at her with concern. Rose's expression must have been one of utter horror. The maid spoke, her voice gentle. "Miss Rose?" The words seemed to snap Rose out of her stupor. Slowly, the maid's words began to sink in. A trembling hand went to her hair, soft and unfamiliar. When her fingers brushed against the lavender strands, Rose whirled around and ran back inside, seeking the nearest mirror, desperate for confirmation. She stared, disbelieving. It was true. She was Rose, Duchess Garnet, trapped. But even the surreal nature of her predicament couldn't eclipse the immediate, burning concern for her savings account back in her own world. Today, of all days, was payday. The cruel irony was almost too much to bear. Overwhelmed, Rose struggled to process the avalanche of information. By morning, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grim acceptance. This wasn't a dream. She was Rose Garnet. This was her life now. Pale skin offset the unusual lavender of her hair, and her emerald eyes, said to be a symbol of love, sparkled with a mixture of bewilderment and burgeoning panic. Rose was also the first Garnet Duchess to manifest as an elf. Hajuk, the founder of the Garnet line, and his wife had been instrumental in the founding of the Abraham Empire. He'd been granted the title of Duke by Emperor Qisha himself. The breathtaking Garnet Mansion, the only one of its kind in the country, had been built during the Dakwai Empire on the beautiful lands of Genri. The family had grown wealthy and powerful, renowned for their elven beauty and strength. But that was then, when Rose's parents were still alive. Now, Duchess Rose had next to nothing. The events of mosaic of emotions unfolded in her mind. The current emperor of the Abraham Empire was Farid Qisha, a man consumed by ambition for his nation. Driven by a lust for conquest, he'd taken multiple queens, exploiting a ludicrous law enacted by Ashur himself that permitted the emperor to have numerous wives. Blinded by his desire for territorial expansion, he'd married recklessly, oblivious to the fact that one of his wives harbored a deep-seated hatred for him. A witch. She loathed the emperor, his thoughts, his actions, his very being. Her fiancé, it turned out, had been killed as a direct result of Emperor Qisha's greed. Faced with the queen's wrath, the emperor could only cower. Queen Dina, consumed by grief and rage, wasted no time in exacting her revenge. She cursed his child, still in the womb. Without revealing a way to lift the curse, Queen Dina took her own life. Time passed. Both the queen and the baby survived, though it was noted that the infant rarely cried. It displayed almost no emotion. The curse had stolen a piece of the baby's soul. That cursed baby was crowned Prince Enoch Ashur, the male protagonist of the novel. According to the original story, Enoch had a problem with marriage, and his designated fiancée, Rosalia, Duchess Garnet. The Holy See criticized the prince's apparent coldness, and Empress Caroline, fearing a loss of public support, devised a simple yet cunning plan: exploit the Garnet Duchy's poverty to orchestrate a sensational love scandal. The Empress bribed Rose, already weary of her impoverished existence. Rose, desperate, accepted the offer, willingly becoming a pawn in the Empress's game. If Rose hadn't met the prince, there wouldn't have been a problem. The big problem was that the devilishly handsome prince was, well, devilishly handsome. Rose fell head over heels in love, like a fool. Unfortunately, the novel's heroine wasn't Rose. It was Celine. As the prince and Celine fell deeply in love, Rose could only step aside. She wasn't the villain of the story, just a convenient tool to be used and discarded. Rose also knew that, after being used, she wouldn't even receive the promised money. Love, she realized bitterly, doesn't pay the bills. So, Rose resolved to do whatever it took in this life to secure funds from the prince as the crown princess. If she wanted to escape this wretched poverty, she needed to prepare and fast. Just then, a maid entered the room. "Perfect timing, miss," she said with a gentle smile. "The master has returned." The word master sparked an idea in Rose's mind. Outside, a carriage stood before the mansion. Kenneth, speaking with the butler, seemed to sense something. He turned, glancing up at the upper floors of the mansion. Spotting his sister Rose, a wide grin spread across his face, and he waved enthusiastically. Seeing her brother's joy, Rose felt a lump form in her throat. The waving young man was Ray, the second male lead in Mosaic of Emotions, and the head of the Garnet family. He was also, crucially, Rose's brother. Upon seeing Rose, Ray rushed over, his face alight with excitement. Rose found it almost unbelievable that the head of a ducal family could be so genuinely naive. Like Ray, he immediately fussed over her, asking if she was feeling better. Relieved to see her seemingly well, Ray took her hand affectionately, expressing his alarm at her recent illness. His words triggered a memory. Before waking up in this strange new reality, she'd been unconscious, burning with a fever that had lingered for over a week. Suddenly, Ray called her name, and a beautifully wrapped gift box materialized before her eyes. It was a birthday present for her 20th. Today, it seemed, was also her birthday in the original storyline. Urged by her brother to open it, Rose lifted the lid with a flicker of anticipation. Surely, even for an impoverished family, a duchess's birthday gift should be something substantial. The sight that greeted her, however, immediately extinguished that hopeful spark. It was a teddy bear. To Rose, anything inedible was essentially useless. Despite her inner disappointment, she managed to feign delight, thanking Ray profusely. He beamed, clearly pleased with the reaction. Oblivious to his sister's carefully constructed expression, Ray suggested a walk in the forest, a plan swiftly vetoed by the ever-present butler. Thwarted, Ray then proposed they read together in the library. Hardly an improvement in Rose's opinion, but refusing would only lead to more fuss, so she agreed. The Garnet Mansion's library, while aesthetically pleasing, was noticeably devoid of anything of real value. Empty spaces echoed around them. Rose observed Ray, his expressions, his gestures. It was painfully obvious that her brother was soft, easily swayed. He'd been swindled out of the family fortune by relatives when he was younger. The servants, faced with abject poverty, had all left. Now, only Ray, Rose, the butler, Bart, and a maid named Vader remained in the sprawling, empty mansion. Yet, Ray also possessed a unique power befitting a second male lead. He was an elven mage, the rarest kind in this world. But while working as a mercenary, he'd kept his elven magic and his identity as the Garnet Duke a closely guarded secret. Fearful of his family being dragged into political turmoil, he'd completely hidden his abilities. Many fans of the novel lamented his unfulfilled romantic storyline, a consequence of his self-imposed isolation. Back in the present, Ray was asking Rose which book she wanted to read first. Rose, utterly disinterested, simply pointed to the shortest one. Ray, seemingly unfazed, selected a tome about mages. Speaking of mages, Rose recalled that the prince's missing soul fragment was also due to a mage's curse. Curious about what it felt like to be devoid of emotion, she asked Ray about the prince. Ray's answer gave Rose pause. The prince, it turned out, was a formidable, almost terrifying figure. He'd slain a monstrous beast at the tender age of 13. So powerful was he that he was the only one capable of wielding the holy sword. This was no man to be trifled with, Rose realized. She and her brother were not the protagonists of this world. Survival here required careful planning. If Enoch was as fearsome as Ray claimed, she needed to tread carefully. Extracting money from him without losing her head would require a delicate strategy. Suddenly, reading with Ray seemed far less appealing than the prospect of refreshments. Rose requested a snack. Visions of elegant, delectable pastries and tea danced in her head, a stark contrast to the plate of homegrown carrots that appeared. Her drink was plain hot water, not a single tea leaf in sight. Ray, bless his heart, explained that he had carefully selected these treats in honor of her birthday. Resigned, Rose took a bite of the carrot. Surprisingly, it wasn't bad, sweeter than she'd expected. Just then, the maid entered the room. As the maid, Vader, approached, she stumbled slightly. Ray, ever solicitous, immediately expressed his concern, urging her to rest. But Vader insisted it was her duty, adding that she always wanted to do things to make everyone happy. Hearing this, a poignant understanding settled over Rose. Even amidst poverty, illness was the most debilitating, the most soul-crushing burden. Though the specifics of her life on Earth remained shrouded in a frustrating amnesia, the raw, aching familiarity of helpless poverty resonated deep within her. She remembered days of sickness where the cost of a visit to a doctor was an insurmountable obstacle. Days spent lying in feverish misery, utterly alone. But now, things were different. Now, she had family, and that meant she had people to care for. With newfound resolve, Rose insisted Vader return to her room and rest. Her tone, though gentle, carried the undeniable weight of a ducal command. Vader, accustomed to obedience, had no choice but to comply. These characters, mere figures in a novel before, now felt startlingly real, their concern for her genuine. Like family, Vader, like Bart, had been loyal to the Garnet household for years. How could she possibly be in perfect health, bearing witness to their slow descent into penury? She, too, was clearly suffering the strains of their poverty, just as Rose herself had once suffered, unable to afford the care she needed. Rose could no longer sit passively. She had to find a way out of this suffocating destitution. As she assessed her options, one path emerged, stark and unavoidable. The novel centered around Celine, the female lead, and the prince's missing soul fragment. If the fragment was near the prince, he would be able to feel emotions. Rose decided to capitalize on the prince's emotions. Noticing his sister lost in thought, Ray asked if she was all right. Rose offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," she replied, "just thinking about how to ensure our safety." The scene shifted to the opulent interior of the royal palace. As always, the palace was adorned with priceless artifacts. A slender hand placed a letter upon a silver tray, then instructed a maid to deliver it to Duke Garnet. This was the Empress, Prince Enoch's mother. Before dispatching the letter, she carefully reminded the maid of its importance, stressing the need for its safe and timely arrival. Sometime after the letter was sent, the Empress, having meticulously orchestrated events, extended an invitation to Ray to visit her as a guest. According to the letter, the Empress summoned Ray to discuss Rose's engagement to the prince. The Empress acknowledged the Garnet family's crippling debt, the quiet desperation clinging to each member of the household. She proposed a solution. If Rose agreed to the engagement, the Empress would personally settle all their debts. Ray would have what he desired. She presented it as a beneficial proposition, a chance to revitalize the Garnet family, urging Ray to consider it carefully. Back in the gardens of the Garnet mansion, Rose surmised that Ray and the Empress were discussing her engagement to the Crown Prince. Knowing her brother's gentle nature, she felt a pang of pity for him, caught in the Empress's web. When the Empress's letter arrived, her brother had hastily departed the mansion. This meant the story was about to begin in earnest. Rose had to secure her source of business funds, and quickly. Though a bit rushed, she needed to act. To escape poverty, she decided to profit from the emotional returns generated by the prince's soul fragment. The main plot of the novel revolved around Celine. In the story, Celine was strolling along Rockingham Beach when she happened upon a blue sapphire. Just then, a ship capsized in a storm, and she rescued the emperor from the raging waters. As a reward for her bravery, Celine was granted a noble title and lavish gifts. She was invited to stay at the royal palace for a week, where she met the prince, and their romance officially began. Therefore, if Rose found the soul fragment before Celine, she would receive the reward and potentially earn a fee. First, she needed to get to Rockingham. With this in mind, she turned to Bart, the butler, informing him that she was going to the museum and would return shortly. The museum was a place that allowed travel to Baron Harriet's territory next to Den Rye. Once there, Rose would find a way to reach Rockingham. Duchess Rose's quest for financial stability began. Before she could depart, however, Bart, the ever-faithful butler, stopped her. His heartfelt farewell touched Rose deeply. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes of his loyalty and concern. She reassured him, promising a safe return after her journey, though she knew not where this path would lead. Rose's face fell as a troubling thought struck her. She had left the mansion with only a few carats for sustenance, completely forgetting about the city gate tax. How could she have been so careless? As she feared, Rose was stopped by the brusque city guards. Upon learning that the carats constituted her entire lunch, the gatekeeper burst into laughter, the sound echoing unkindly in the bustling square. A second later, his demeanor shifted drastically. He eyed the carats with suspicion, accusing her of smuggling contraband. Despite Rose's earnest explanations, the guards remained stubbornly convinced of her deceit. Just as Rose began to contemplate how to resolve this predicament, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the tension. A weary voice inquired about the commotion. The guard, puffed up with self-importance, declared that he was merely inspecting a suspicious individual. Seeing that the newcomer was Baron Harriet Tarlette, to be precise, Rose swiftly removed her hat. The effect was instantaneous. The guard's jaws dropped, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Recognizing the young woman before him as Duchess Garnet, Baron Harriet flushed with embarrassment. The guard blunder had placed him in a most awkward position. He stammered an apology for his subordinate's rudeness, then inquired as to why the Duchess was traveling alone. Rose, ever forthright, explained her desire to reach Rockingham, armed with nothing but a handful of carats. Baron Harriet quickly confessed his own lack of funds. If she wished to reach Rockingham, a carriage would be necessary. Rose, sensing an opportunity, fixed the Baron with a pleading gaze. A carriage, he conceded, he could indeed arrange. Relief washed over Rose. A glimmer of hope rekindled in her heart. Expressing her gratitude for the Baron's kindness, she eagerly awaited the promised transport. Moments later, Baron Harriet introduced Rose to Kai, a local merchant with a spacious, comfortable carriage. As a token of her appreciation, Rose presented Baron Harriet with one of her homegrown carats before swiftly boarding the carriage, leaving the Baron speechless, a gleaming carat clutched in his hand. He watched as the carriage rattled away, carrying the Duchess towards Rockingham, shaking his head in bewildered amusement. This Duchess Garnet, he mused, was certainly certainly a unique individual. 3 days later, after a long and arduous journey, Rose finally arrived at her destination, the estate of Count Innet. True to form, she thanked Kai with a prize carrot. Before departing, she promised to repay his kindness someday, leaving Kai slightly perplexed by her unusual gratitude. Following the directions she had gleaned, Rose headed towards a dense wooded area at the edge of the beach, the path leading directly to her objective. After a strenuous trek through the thick undergrowth, she finally reached the place she had been seeking. This was the beach where Celine was destined to find the soul fragment, but a nagging hesitation held Rose back. This beach belonged to Celine's childhood friend, a part of the Innet family estate. Celine, therefore, could stroll there openly, without fear of reprisal. Rose, however, was a stranger. She would have to act quickly, retrieving the fragment before being discovered. With this in mind, she began to dig frantically in the sand. Suddenly, she sensed movement behind her. The guards had discovered her clandestine activities. Rose froze, a wave of frustration rising in her throat. Celine had never been caught, not once. After a brief interrogation, her identity as Duchess Garnet was revealed. Nibbling sadly on a carrot, Rose explained that she had come to the beach in search of a lost item. By way of apology, she offered the soldiers some of her homegrown Denryu carrots. Just then, another figure appeared. Introducing himself as Chan Innet, Celine's childhood friend, he recognized Rose instantly. Without hesitation, she curtsied politely. Upon learning her identity, Chan graciously invited her to his residence. To welcome Rose, Chan had prepared a lavish feast. The sight of the delectable spread before her made Rose gasp in astonishment. With her first bite, an explosion of exquisite flavors filled her mouth. Watching Rose savor the meal, Chan smiled gently and said, "I heard Duchess Garnet snuck onto our family's beach." At his words, Rose choked, spraying a mouthful of cake across the table. Chan chuckled, assuring her that she was welcome to visit the beach anytime. Extending an invitation wouldn't be difficult, he explained, though tomorrow might be slightly inconvenient due to the arrival of some guests. Rose surmised that the impending visitors were the Emperor and Empress. According to the plot, Celine would soon find the soul fragment, so Rose needed to retrieve it first. Just as she contemplated sneaking onto the beach, Chan remarked that such a feat would be exceedingly difficult. Defeated, Rose abandoned the idea and steered the conversation elsewhere. She now realized that Chan was a blessing in disguise. When she offered to bring more provisions if needed, Rose excitedly clasped Chan's hand, wishing him well. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the hallway, followed by the announcement of a visitor for Chan. Rose recognized the newcomer instantly. Flowing red hair, sweet amber eyes, it was Celine, the heroine of the novel, the very woman who stole the prince's heart in the original story. The room filled with Celine's melodious voice. She showered Rose with compliments, remarking on her fairy-like beauty, claiming she had never seen anyone so lovely. Though Rose maintained a calm facade, her heart pounded with anxiety. If she hesitated any longer, Celine would surely find the soul fragment. Without a second thought, Rose announced her intention to visit the beach, explaining that she had lost something there. Celine's curiosity was piqued, but after Rose's brief explanation, she seemed convinced. After a long silence, Celine suddenly addressed Duchess Rose, revealing that she knew a secret path to the beach. She inquired whether Rose would like to accompany her, as she planned to visit the beach tomorrow anyway. Rose knew this was her golden opportunity to retrieve the soul fragment. She confessed to Celine that she had dropped a sapphire while admiring the ocean view. Rose implored Celine to help her search for the gem. Upon hearing her plea, Celine readily agreed. They decided to embark on their search together. The next day, as dawn broke, Rose found herself in the estate's guest quarters. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Celine whispered that it was time to go. Waking to see Celine at her door, Rose couldn't help but tremble. Celine, cheerful and full of energy, led Rose through her secret passage towards the beach. The sky grew overcast. The crashing waves against the shore seemed unusually loud, and Rose felt as if the ocean itself was protesting her arrival. Celine, brimming with enthusiasm, was eager to help Rose find her lost gem. Suddenly, Rose remembered something crucial. She cautioned Celine not to touch the stone if she found it, but to call her over instead, as it could be dangerous for Celine to handle. After a long search, they were still empty-handed. The sky darkened further. According to the original story, today was the day the Emperor's ship would capsize, though he would ultimately be rescued. At that moment, Rose thought the Emperor incredibly foolish for venturing out to sea in such weather. It would be a miracle if his ship didn't capsize. Just as the waves receded, a blue jade stone emerged from the wet sand. Rose spotted it immediately and rushed forward to snatch it up. The stone was much smaller than she had imagined. She quickly tucked it into her pocket, her mind already racing with visions of a wealthy future. Seeing the joyous expression on Rose's face, Celine knew she had found her stone. Celine was happy for her. Suddenly, Celine noticed something amiss. She pointed towards the distance, remarking that something seemed to be out there. Rose turned languidly to look. Upon seeing the scene, her expression remained unchanged, but a gasp escaped her lips. Celine expressed deep concern for the distant ship, fearing that it would capsize in the worsening conditions. Rose, utterly unconcerned, munched on a carrot, enjoying the unfolding drama with an air of detached amusement. Celine, oblivious to Rose's indifference, fretted over the distant vessel. Rose turned to her and asked, "What are you doing? Aren't you going to save His Majesty?" Confusion clouded Celine's features. Rose clarified, explaining that the person on board was the Emperor. Rose urged her to act swiftly, just as she had in the original storyline. The moment Celine learned of the Emperor's presence, she sprang into action, rushing towards the struggling ship. Rose, however, remained preoccupied with the deliciousness of her Danry carrots. Thanks to her, Rose mused, Celine would be granted a title. It was enough to consider her mission accomplished. Suddenly, the heavens opened, unleashing a torrential downpour. Rose couldn't help but appreciate the perfectly dramatic weather. After a while, the rain showed no signs of abating. Guards arrived on the scene, but the Emperor and Empress were already safe, thanks to Celine, with even a little unwitting assistance from Rose. Someone shouted, explaining that the ship had capsized due to the treacherous weather, and these young women had saved them. The guards, astonished, murmured amongst themselves near the Emperor's residence. Cheers erupted, hailing Celine and Rose as the heroines who had rescued the Emperor and Empress. Celine bashfully accepted the accolades. To reward his saviors, the Emperor decided to bestow upon them titles. He also extended an invitation to the imperial palace. Rose knew her chance to meet the crown prince had finally arrived. The Emperor's gaze fell upon Rose. It was the first time he had met the Duchess Garnet. Learning that she had just turned 20, he resolved to present her with a gift befitting her status upon their arrival at the palace. Hearing this, Rose envisioned mountains of glittering coins. She failed to notice the Emperor's knowing smile. A new day dawned, and the carriage rumbled along the road. Outside, warm sunlight bathed the path ahead. Inside, Rose reveled in the perks of royal transport. She comfortably indulged in delectable treats, a welcome change from her usual carrots. Lost in her culinary enjoyment, Rose didn't notice Celine sitting quietly in the corner. Celine spoke hesitantly, confessing that the situation felt surreal. She couldn't believe she was being honored in such a way, especially since she had only acted on Rose's suggestion. Rose understood Celine's discomfort with taking credit for saving the Emperor and Empress. There was nothing to be done. The plot had already diverged. In the original story, Celine was supposed to have jumped into the sea herself. Now, it was as if Rose had pushed her. So, Rose told Celine that perhaps this was her destiny. She then offered Celine a plate of pastries. They were on their way to receive their rewards, and Celine should focus on enjoying them. At these words, Celine's tension eased. Regaining her composure, she resumed her conversation with Rose. Just then, the carriage arrived at the imperial palace. Rose gazed out the window. Before her stood a magnificent palace, radiating an aura of grandeur. As soon as they disembarked, a group of attendants greeted them, ushering them inside. Guided by the head butler, Rose and Celine toured the palace. The butler explained that, as the Emperor's saviors, they'd been granted access to quarters typically reserved for members of the royal family. Even their attire during their stay would be provided by the capital's most renowned tailor. Rose scanned her surroundings, hoping to catch a glimpse of the crown prince. Then, the butler uttered a phrase that caught Rose's attention. The expenses for maintaining your dignity will also be fully reimbursed. Rose was slightly puzzled by this statement. The butler clarified that this was separate from the rewards they were to receive. At this, both women were stunned. Regaining her composure, Rose clasped her hands together and expressed her gratitude to the emperor. The butler led Celine to a room adorned with a rose garden motif, while Rose was escorted to a different chamber, known as the Starlight Room. Upon receiving her room assignment, a flicker of worry crossed Rose's mind regarding the heating costs. However, she quickly recalled that the royal family would bear the expense, allowing a small sigh of relief to escape her lips. Footsteps echoed from outside, and one of the approaching figures stepped forward, introducing himself as Loudon. He explained that they would be attending to Rose according to palace protocol. But first, Loudon requested Rose's attention to a rather delicate matter. He gingerly produced a small, white pouch. It was Rose's pouch, now emanating a rather unpleasant odor. As Loudon made a move to discard the offending item, Rose panicked, her hand shooting out to stop him. The pouch contained the soul fragment, her very means of achieving financial independence. Rose would not let it out of her sight. Seeing her distress, Loudon had no choice but to relent. Next came the matter of clothing and accessories. Loudon instructed Rose to choose whatever she pleased. When Rose selected a rather vibrant yellow bag, Loudon let out a frustrated sigh. He explained that the crown prince was due to return soon, and many eyes would be on the royal family. Rose needed to be mindful of her attire. Sometime later, the maids had finished preparing Rose. One of them approached, initiating a conversation, inquiring whether Rose required hair oil in preparation for her debut. Rose, momentarily bewildered, was unsure how to respond. By then, the maid had already completed her makeup. Upon seeing the result, a collective gasp filled the room. Rose was breathtaking. Her captivating violet hair, adorned with silver ornaments, radiated an ethereal glow. Even Rose herself had to admit she looked astonishingly beautiful. Just then, another group of women entered the room. They had come bearing the emperor's reward. At the mention of a reward, Rose's mind immediately translated it into monetary value. The emperor's gift turned out to be a fashionable hair ornament, popular amongst the nobility. Everyone marveled at its exquisite craftsmanship. Rose, however, felt it resembled something more akin to a tourist souvenir. Regardless, she tried it on. Outwardly, she feigned appreciation for the beautiful ornament, while inwardly, disappointment gnawed at her. Just as Rose prepared to remove it, it slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. Panic seized her. The ornament lay shattered on the ground. A heavy silence descended upon the room. The maid scarcely dared to breathe. Rose felt as though she had fallen into the abyss. She imagined the emperor's gift must have been exorbitantly expensive. The very first gift bestowed upon her by His Majesty now lay in pieces. The entire room was frozen in place. The maids stared at each other, aghast. Our protagonist's face was a mask of blank dismay. Piece by piece, the maids began to gather the scattered fragments, their movements laced with regret. Rose remained as still as a statue. Her mind raced, desperately searching for a way to salvage the situation. Suddenly, an idea sparked in her mind. She called out to the maids, instructing them to collect every last shard. Within moments, at Rose's behest, all the broken pieces were gathered. A curious maid stepped forward, inquiring what the Duchess planned to do. Rose, smoothing a hand over her violet hair, told them to simply watch. Looks of awe filled the room. One maid could scarcely believe her eyes. Duchess Rose was weaving the fallen beads into her braid. Rose explained that this was an elven hair ornamenting technique. Time for Rose to spin a tale. She asked if they had heard of naturalism. The maids were intrigued by the unfamiliar term. This left Rose feeling a bit helpless, as she was essentially making it up as she went along. Fortunately, Loudon entered to check on their progress. He announced that once Rose was ready, they would proceed with the palace tour. Even Celine appeared, stating her desire to accompany Rose. Having no other option, Rose agreed. Considered the most opulent location in the empire, the imperial palace exuded an air of royal nobility, imbued with a sense of serene elegance. Rose and Celine had been touring the palace for some time. Celine remarked on the unusually large number of people present in the palace today. Loudon explained that it was the social season, typically a bustling time, but at this juncture, romance blossomed day and night. Rose, meanwhile, was on a quest of her own, her gaze sweeping across the crowds, searching for a flash of golden hair. She had to find a blonde prince amongst this throng. Suddenly, a voice cut through the general murmur, capturing everyone's attention. A noblewoman was discussing the rumored crown prince's consort selection banquet. Hearing this, Rose froze. A wave of uncertainty washed over her. Had her engagement to the prince already been finalized? The narrative seemed to be veering off course. Typically, Rose should have formally concluded negotiations for her engagement with the crown prince before Celine's arrival in the capital, but her detour to Rockingham had complicated matters. Rose suddenly pictured a scenario where she and Celine met the prince simultaneously. Unlike the original story, she was the one possessing the soul fragment. In the original narrative, Rose had learned about the sapphire and stolen it, driven in part by the belief that possessing it would capture the prince's affections. But things had unfolded quite differently. Enoch had regarded Rose with disdain, his discomfort in her presence palpable. In the end, Rose had been left deeply disappointed, consumed by regret for her actions and burdened by the prince's antipathy. Not only that, but she'd also been forced to return the soul fragment to Celine. The thought of this fueled Rose's desire to meet the prince alone, strengthening her resolve to find him. Celine, noticing Rose's distraction, inquired if she was looking for something. Rose, feigning casual interest, mentioned hearing of the crown prince's return to the palace and wondered if he was present, as she had never met him. Loudon, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Articles about the prince have been published, accompanied by his portrait. Haven't you seen them? Rose, with a candid shrug, replied that she didn't subscribe to newspapers. Sometimes poverty had its perks. This left Loudon momentarily speechless. Recovering quickly, she offered a helpful suggestion, mentioning a room where the prince's portrait hung. It was open to the public, but rarely visited, so it was often closed. If Rose wished to see it, Loudon would be happy to take her. Rose reasoned that familiarizing herself with the prince's appearance would aid her search, so she readily accepted the offer. The next day found Rose still at the palace. Early in the morning, the maids bustled about, preparing for the day ahead. They were to assist Rose in selecting a gown. Suddenly, a dazzling array of dresses materialized before her eyes. Rose, famished as she was, couldn't resist pausing to admire the colorful array hanging from the undergarment racks. She inquired of the maids whether this process would conclude before dinner, as she was ravenous. Just then, another noblewoman entered unexpectedly. She scoffed at Rose's question, implying that no lady of noble standing would dine before a ball. There was to be an awards ceremony and debut, and Rose required a special gown for the occasion. A familiar voice then chimed in. Celine, having taken her time admiring the palace scenery, had arrived a little late. The noblewoman, momentarily stunned by Celine's radiant beauty, complimented her captivating appearance before directing both women to begin selecting their gowns. The maids enthusiastically assisted the two duchesses, the noblewoman assuring them that she would make them the most beautiful women in the empire. It was her duty, she explained, to provide the finest service, as this banquet was being held in honor of those who had saved His Majesty. However, the ceremony was only 3 days away, so her preparations were somewhat simplified due to the limited time. Rose and Celine, however, didn't quite see it that way. Rose muttered under her breath, commenting that too much simplicity might land them back in confinement. A second later, her face brightened, declaring her eagerness to witness the lady's skills. She then expressed her desire to incorporate the items given to her by His Majesty into her hairstyle. The noblewoman, whose name Rose later learned was Madame Anthony, glanced at the shimmering beads and frowned. Too simple, she declared, unsuitable for the banquet. Rose countered, explaining their sentimental value. But Madame Anthony remained adamant, urging Rose to reconsider. Rose gazed wistfully at the glittering beads nestled in their box. Suddenly, inspiration struck. I envision, she announced, a fusion of fairy fashion with naturalism. Madame Anthony looked perplexed. In a flurry of deft movements, Rose began weaving small, delicate blossoms into her elaborate hairstyle. "Behold," she proclaimed, gesturing to her handiwork, "the beauty of naturalism." Madame Anthony stared, utterly captivated by the transformation. Even Celine gasped, declaring that Rose looked like a fairy princess. Madame Anthony, overcome with excitement, let out a small cry. This novel style, this naturalism, intrigued her immensely. Rose knew her gambit had worked. Madame Anthony, eyes gleaming with entrepreneurial spirit, proposed a collaboration. Rose, never one to turn down a money-making opportunity, readily agreed. A deal was struck. Before taking her leave, Rose had one final request. She asked Madame Anthony to find her a bracelet, a delicate setting for the soul fragment gemstone. Madame Anthony, still buzzing with excitement, readily agreed. Finally, the moment Rose had been anticipating arrived, but her face fell as she surveyed the meager refreshments laid out before her. She had expected savory delights, perhaps a selection of meats, not just carbohydrates. Unable to contain her disappointment, Rose turned to a nearby maid. "When?" she inquired, her voice laced with a hint of desperation. "Will the meat be served?" The maid's face immediately became stern. "Meat," she declared, her tone severe, "is a food to be avoided." They adhered, she explained, to the Pope's pronouncements on fasting, abstaining from both meat and alcohol. Such indulgences, she continued, led to corpulence and compromised one's health. Eating and drinking, it seemed, were considered sinful. Rose, outwardly compliant, inwardly seethed with resentment towards this Pope. After a while, she finished the meager offering, but her stomach still rumbled, a hollow protest against the lack of sustenance. Having consumed only a small amount of carbohydrates, Rose felt listless and unfulfilled. Loudon was outlining the next day's schedule when Rose abruptly interrupted, expressing a sudden desire to explore the palace. In truth, she planned to sneak off in search of more substantial fare. Loudon offered to accompany her, but Rose swiftly declined. Just as Loudon was casting about for a solution to this predicament, Celine appeared, expressing her own desire to join the exploration. She, too, wished to visit the Empress's painting studio in the East Wing, but Rose truly wanted to go alone. Thinking quickly, she declared, with an air of whimsical mystery, "I am a fairy, you see, and I prefer to explore solo." Celine, surprisingly, seemed to accept this explanation without question. After a brief back and forth, Rose finally got her wish, free to wander the palace alone. As she walked, Rose counted the coins in her hand. The dignity maintenance allowance, she mused, should be enough for a decent hamburger. Continuing on her way, Rose's attention was drawn to a small commotion ahead. Suddenly, she noticed them. A camera, and beside it, someone scribbling in a notepad. Reporters, 2 of them, and they had clearly noticed her. Emerging from the palace, dressed as she was, she had piqued their interest. They decided to approach, hoping for a scoop. The first to approach was Johnson, a seasoned reporter from the Gray editorial department. As he drew near, Rose instinctively recoiled, shrinking back like a startled hedgehog. This only fueled their curiosity. They surrounded her, peppering her with questions. Utterly overwhelmed, Rose turned and fled back towards the palace. The reporters, sensing a story, grew even more determined. This mysterious woman, who was she? They gave chase, eager for an exclusive. Poor Rose, now forced to flee from the relentless reporters. She adopted the strategy of flight as the best course of action, making it impossible for the reporters to catch up. But then disaster struck. In her haste, Rose's hat flew off, her distinctive hair color now exposed, revealing her identity as the Duchess Garnet. Just as Rose stood there, frozen in panic, a female reporter approached, eager for a word. She wanted to delve deeper into this intriguing development. Rose didn't care much about anything except the burning need to escape. A frantic game of hide-and-seek ensued, her pursuers hot on her heels. Breathless and desperate, Rose scanned her surroundings, fleeing from the opulent, crowded areas of the palace into a deserted wing. Finally, she spotted a promising refuge and darted inside, hoping to lose the tenacious reporters. The room, adorned with paintings from across the kingdom, exuded an air of tranquility. The silence, however, was shattered as the reporters, their voices echoing through the corridors, closed in. With its myriad nooks and crannies, the room offered ample hiding places. Rose held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. A long, tense silence stretched out before she finally dared to peek out. Just a few laps of running had made her feel 10 years older, and her legs ached. Taking in her surroundings properly for the first time, Rose realized she had stumbled into a library of unparalleled elegance. Her eyes were drawn to a particular portrait, instantly recognizable as Prince Enoch. The painting shimmered, adorned with gold, silver, and diamonds. Mesmerized, Rose couldn't resist reaching out to touch the glittering jewels. As she idly calculated how many meals those gems could buy, a diamond, dislodged by her touch, tumbled from the portrait. Rose stared at the diamond in her hand, trembling. As if this weren't bad enough, a cascade of other jewels followed suit. In a matter of seconds, the portrait was stripped bare. Rose wanted to scream. As she frantically tried to devise an explanation, a figure emerged from the shadows behind her. Backlit and imposing, the figure demanded, "Who are you?" Rose's heart sank. It was Prince Enoch himself, his face etched with anger. He demanded to know when she had entered. Panic seized Rose. She hadn't expected to encounter the prince here, of all places. He was even more striking in person than in his portrait. Seeing the diamonds in her hand, he instantly branded her a thief. He accused her of trying to steal the jewels from his portrait. Rose, desperate, stammered that the gems had fallen off, that she hadn't meant to take them. Enoch, noticing her distinctive hair color, recognized her as Duchess Garnet. This, in his mind, only confirmed her guilt. The Garnet family was notoriously impoverished. Her trembling hands, her rapid breathing, her defensive posture, it all seemed to point to her guilt. Rose felt Enoch's gaze, cold and impersonal, as if she were nothing more than an object. She knew she was in serious trouble. Before he could condemn her, she had to do something, anything, to salvage the situation. Enoch watched her, perplexed, as she suddenly bowed deeply. "Your Highness," she said, "you seem displeased. I thought this might appease you." Enoch blinked, taken aback. "I don't even have emotions," he replied. "How can I be displeased?" He reminded her of his inability to feel. This surprised Rose, as he didn't seem to be reacting to the soul fragment she carried. In the novel, the prince was supposed to feel uneasy around her because of it, but his current demeanor suggested otherwise. Straightening up, Rose formally requested a conversation. After a moment of hesitation, Enoch agreed. The atmosphere, however, remained thick with tension. Enoch's unwavering gaze made Rose uncomfortable. "I know you are a guest of the king," he began, "but a guest who breaks into halls and steals." Rose calmly replied that she had no intention of robbing anyone, and that the falling gems had simply startled her. Enoch remained unconvinced. The Duchess's attitude, he felt, was far too careless. He wanted to hear the criminal's explanation. Rose paused, then looked Enoch directly in the eye. "If you continue to treat me this way," she said seriously, "you will regret it. Because," she added, her voice suddenly brighter, "I have your soul fragment." She confessed to being a little flustered, as this was their first meeting. Inwardly, Rose preened at her quick thinking, but Enoch's temper flared. He made a move to apprehend her. Rose calmly placed a hand on her chest. "Your Highness," she urged, "calm yourself. Search your heart, and tell me if you don't feel something." A triumphant smile played on Rose's lips. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am an expert in matters of the heart, Your Highness. I can help you feel again." Enoch didn't immediately respond. Rose assumed he was simply taken aback by her audacity. "Shall we begin now?" she offered. But Enoch's expression remained unchanged. He simply stared at her. After a long moment, he finally said, "I understand." Rose seized the opportunity to build on this supposed understanding. "My fairy blood," she explained, "grants me this unique ability. It is something only I can do in this world." Enoch countered, "I've never seen you before, so perhaps the only part is correct. This is, however, the first time I've met someone who attempts to deceive me so blatantly." Rose knew he still didn't believe her. Feigning vulnerability, she asked, "Do you not feel even a flicker within you, Your Highness? Something different?" But looking at Enoch's impassive face, Rose knew her persuasive efforts had failed. Her heart sank. She couldn't let her plan fall apart now. She had to do something. Before he could have her arrested, Rose stood up resolutely. Just as she was about to try reasoning with Enoch again, a commotion erupted outside the room. It was the reporters. They hadn't given up their pursuit. Seeing their persistence, Rose urged the prince to hide with her. "It will be troublesome if they come in here," she explained. In her haste, she stepped on the hem of her dress and stumbled, falling forward towards Enoch. A loud crash echoed through the room as the reporters, breathless and disheveled from their search, burst through the doors. They froze, stunned by the scene before them. Rose and the prince were in a compromising position. From the reporter's perspective, it appeared as though they were kissing. This was breaking news. The reporters immediately began snapping photos. Bombarded with questions, Rose and Enoch could only gape in stunned silence. Suddenly, another group rushed in, ordering the reporters to stand down. Acting on the Empress's orders, the guards barred the reporters from the palace for the day. The reporters were forcibly removed, the guards efficiently handling the chaotic situation. The room returned to its previous quiet state. After a moment, a guard entered, reporting that the reporters had been dealt with. He approached Enoch. "Your Highness, are you all right?" he asked. "Her Majesty has forbidden the reporters from entering the palace, but they may not give up so easily. It would be best if you move to another location, Your Highness. That compromising photograph may already have been taken." Enoch didn't respond, his mind reeling. In the ensuing silence, Rose's stomach rumbled loudly. Ignoring the awkwardness, Rose stated frankly, "I haven't eaten anything all day." "It wouldn't do for the Duchess who saved His Majesty to faint from hunger, would it?" Rose spoke without a trace of shame, while the guard standing beside her shifted uncomfortably. Enoch stared at Rose, speechless. She was smiling, seemingly unfazed by the whole ordeal. Worn down by her persistence, Enoch finally relented. In a secluded, ornately decorated corner of the palace gardens, Enoch had food brought for Rose. She happily devoured a succulent leg of lamb, completely oblivious to the stares of those around her. Watching her eat with such gusto, Enoch tentatively reached for a piece of buttered bread. As he brought it to his lips, the maids gasped. Rose, puzzled, glanced up at their horrified expressions. Contrary to the maids' reactions, Enoch seemed to be enjoying the bread. Rose suddenly asked, "Can you taste it?" She clarified, "I mean the feeling from just now, when you took a bite. Savor it." Enoch frowned, clearly bewildered. "What feeling?" Rose flushed, forced to elaborate. "When our lips almost touched, you reacted. I felt it." She rushed on. "Your heart was racing. Your body and your face were flushed with heat." Enoch considered this, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I did feel something." Rose beamed. "That, Your Highness, was excitement." Enoch paused. It felt more like discomfort. Rose's smile faltered. Enoch continued, his tone earnest. "When you fell towards me, I felt something akin to a threat, or rather, a distinct and indescribable unease." Rose's carefully constructed hopes crumbled. A wave of indignation washed over her. "A threat?" she whispered, hurt. Even Enoch seemed unsure. "I don't know if it was a true emotion," he admitted, "but it was something." Despite her wounded pride, Rose pressed on. "It was a true emotion. It was caused by my fairy blood." She gestured emphatically. "My journey to Rockingham, saving His Majesty, and now, this evoking a feeling within you. These are not mere coincidences." A thoughtful expression crossed Enoch's face. "Perhaps," he mused, "you were guided by some divine entity." Oblivious to the hushed whispers of the maids, they continued their discussion. "You intended to steal the jewels," Enoch recounted, ticking off the points on his fingers. "Then you attempted to deceive me. Then you nearly assaulted me. And now you're attempting to deceive me again." Rose, exasperated by his unwavering suspicion, threw her hands up in the air. "Honestly," she cried, "enough." A nearby guard cleared his throat warningly. Rose's gaze snapped to him. Dark hair, gray eyes, it was Jonah. Undeterred, she ignored his warning. Turning back to Enoch, she demanded, "Isn't lacking emotions a serious problem? The discomfort you felt earlier, that was because of my unique ability." Enoch hesitated. I don't know. I can't be certain it was because of your ability." He countered, "If what you say is true, then the monsters that evoke similar feelings in me must also be emotion specialists." Rose was momentarily speechless. Then a mischievous glint entered her eyes. An idea was forming. Glancing at the tempting lamb chop in her hand, she sighed dramatically. Time for her last resort. "Jonah," she called out, startling the guard. "Please escort me to the kitchens." At the Duchess's command, Jonah had little choice but to comply. A ripple of murmurs followed them as they made their way through the palace. The Duchess Garnet requesting the kitchens? Unheard of. As they walked, Jonah gleaned from Rose's fragmented explanations that she was attempting to awaken the prince's emotions. It seemed far-fetched, to say the least. "You're trying to what?" he asked, incredulous. At her firm nod, he turned to Enoch, seeking confirmation. "Your Highness." Enoch shrugged. "It's worth investigating," he conceded. "If Duchess Garnet is lying, her family will be in a very difficult position." A maid led them to a large, bustling room, the heart of the palace's culinary operations. As the doors swung open, Rose stepped inside, a greeting on her lips, but it died in her throat as she was met with the sound of sobbing. The head chef, a portly man with a tear-stained apron, was lamenting his inability to sleep despite pouring his heart and soul into creating exquisite dishes. The other kitchen staff were attempting to console him, oblivious to the new arrivals. It wasn't until a maid nervously announced the presence of the prince and the Duchess that the kitchen staff realized the gravity of the situation. A flurry of panicked apologies filled the air. Outside the kitchen, an unpleasant scene was unfolding as news of Enoch's arrival spread. The head chef, trembling, prostrated himself before Enoch. Even Rose was bewildered. She'd simply wanted to borrow the kitchen. The chef, assuming Enoch was there to reprimand him about the food, stammered apologies. "Your Highness, Yes, you. Enoch cut him off. "That's not why I'm here." He gestured towards Rose. "Duchess Garnet wishes to use the kitchen." Rose blinked, wondering if she'd misheard. "Use the kitchen?" His earlier tone had suggested utter exhaustion. The chef, still flustered, directed his question to Rose. "May I ask why the Duchess requires the kitchen?" Rose, with a casual shrug, delivered her bombshell. "I thought I'd make something for His Highness." The chef, eager to redeem himself, immediately offered his assistance. But Rose firmly refused. She wanted to personally prepare this dish for the prince. No one knew that behind that dazzling smile was Rose's plan to provoke the prince. The kitchen was stocked with ample ingredients, more than enough for Rose to showcase her skills. She had barely begun when Enoch inquired what she was making for him. Rose chided him for his impatience. This annoyed Jonah, who spoke up. As usual, Rose ignored the guard. She intently asked Enoch if he had ever tasted anything truly special. Enoch believed all food was the same, but Rose disagreed. While the dishes served in the greenhouse were exquisite, that wasn't true excellence. Some dishes could bring joy, happiness, and satisfaction, while others could trigger rage. Rose produced a jar of honey. She declared she would make Enoch feel emotions through her cooking. The servants were bewildered. Only Rose knew her determination to prove her abilities were real, not a deception. Finally, Rose completed her elaborate dish. The servants thought the food looked like it came from hell and might be fatal to consume. Jonah, unable to bear it any longer, demanded to know what Rose had made. He exclaimed that it wasn't food. Jonah believed Rose was attempting to assassinate the royal family. Rose thought Jonah was exaggerating, as everything she used was edible. However, the chef kindly warned His Highness that, based on his observations, consuming it might induce a stomachache. Rose disagreed, insisting Enoch try her ominous dish. Jonah threatened to arrest her if anything happened to the prince. As they argued, Enoch scooped up a spoonful and slowly tasted it. This astonished Jonah. To Jonah's bewilderment, Enoch, instead of putting the plate down, continued to eat with relish. This disgusted the kitchen staff. Every bite Enoch took made Jonah tremble. After finishing, Enoch elegantly wiped his mouth and ordered Jonah to arrest Duchess Garnet for attempted murder. Before Jonah could act, Rose asked Enoch if he'd forgotten the purpose of the dish. Enoch assumed she'd tried to poison him. Rose explained that the dish was meant to evoke anger. Enoch didn't understand, so Rose elaborated that it was rage-inducing food. Even a saint would erupt after tasting it. The servants nodded in agreement. Jonah didn't understand why Rose would make such an infuriating dish. Rose's intention was for Enoch to feel anger. She asked him how he felt after eating it. Enoch slowly said he wasn't sure, but perhaps he'd lost his sense of taste. Rose called for the chef. She instructed him to make something simple, preferably something the prince liked. The chef trembled, clasping his hands tightly. He tried to imagine what the prince might enjoy. Once he had an idea, the chef relaxed slightly and began to cook. The ingredients were quickly prepared. The chef, using his culinary expertise, selected the freshest items. The chef impressed everyone present. The atmosphere was entirely different from the previous hellish scene. He carefully chopped each ingredient, seasoning the steak with wine. The aroma filled the entire room. Soon, several dishes were ready. These included steak, shrimp with cheese sauce, and a hamburger. Rose turned to His Highness, inviting him to enjoy the meal. Enoch slowly began to eat. The chef's expression was tense. Enoch picked up a shrimp with cheese sauce and took a bite, the savory shrimp flavor filling his mouth. Enoch then tried the hamburger. Rose watched as Enoch proceeded to consume everything on the table. After a while, the plates were all empty. Everyone was stunned. Even Enoch himself hadn't expected to enjoy the meal so much. He looked at the empty plates and told the chef. The food was delicious. The chef was deeply moved. This was precisely the effect Rose had hoped to achieve. Everyone enjoyed good food, and even Enoch himself hadn't known his own preferences. Yet, the chef had coincidentally prepared 3 dishes he loved. The chef bowed his head in gratitude. Now everyone understood how much effort he had put into catering to the prince's palate. The empress had always kept a close watch on her son. If the prince reacted even slightly differently than usual, she often replaced the servants. While reading novels, Rose had only sympathized with the empress, but hadn't understood the hardships of those working in such a stifling environment. She imagined it must be incredibly difficult being the chef. After Enoch finished eating, Rose asked for his opinion. After eating her hellish dish and then the chef's food, had his mood changed? Enoch honestly replied that when he ate that strange soup, he felt nauseous and wanted to vomit. Enoch's face unconsciously scrunched up, but when he ate the chef's food, he found he enjoyed the savory flavors. The chef, standing beside them, agreed, saying the prince always finished light and refreshing dishes. Enoch's mood had visibly improved after eating the chef's food. Those present slowly realized their prince could experience discomfort and feel better. This meant Rose's claim about creating a dish to induce disgust was true. Rose, pressing her advantage, asked Enoch if he believed she was an expert on emotions. While Enoch remained skeptical, he had to admit he had felt emotions he'd never experienced before. The fact was now undeniable. Duchess Garnet had indeed awakened the prince's emotions. The day seemed to drag on endlessly. Rose finally escaped that hellish room. She wanted to take a walk to relieve her stress. As for Enoch, after learning he could feel emotions, he left without a word. As Rose strolled through the garden, the chef came running frantically, calling her name. After composing himself, he bowed deeply, sincerely thanking Rose. For a moment, Rose was unsure what the chef was thanking her for. He explained his gratitude, saying it was because of her special ability that His Highness could feel emotions. She had given him the joy of cooking. The chef confessed he knew His Highness could feel, but this was the first time he had witnessed it firsthand. The chef presented Rose with a gift to express his gratitude. He explained that, while people might not believe in her abilities now, he wanted to thank her because she had saved his family. He believed that in the future, many would acknowledge her abilities and offer her praise and encouragement. The gift was unexpected for Rose, but she was nonetheless delighted. The next morning, a servant brought Rose breakfast. These were dishes the head chef had prepared with sincere gratitude. Then, Loudon, standing beside her, mentioned the reporters chasing Rose to the library, and that she had also heard about Rose helping the prince feel emotions and her special abilities. Rose hadn't expected the news to spread so quickly, but she confirmed the rumors were true. Hearing this, Loudon hesitated, wanted to say something. After a moment, she produced a newspaper and showed it to Rose. The headline read, "The Crown Prince Falls for Princess Garnet." The newspaper's content was shocking, which explained why reporters had been gathered outside the palace for days. Loudon, worried about Rose, kindly asked her not to leave the palace today. She didn't know that Rose wasn't bothered by this. Rose was pleased that the photo in the newspaper was flattering. Just then, a maid entered and announced the arrival of Duke Garnet. What was coming was coming. A moment later, the door burst open and Ray rushed in, his face filled with worry for his sister. But his sister was calmly enjoying her breakfast. Seeing Rose, Ray couldn't help but burst into tears. He had a million questions to ask her, from saving the emperor to falling in love with the prince. These events had taken him completely by surprise. Ray didn't consider these small matters. His sister's engagement and marriage to the prince were incredibly significant, but Rose didn't see it that way. She explained that she had done all of this intentionally. Ray's jaw dropped. He demanded to know why she hadn't told him. Rose simply explained that she had to marry someone anyway, and since the prince was the wealthiest, why not try for the wealthiest? Then she pulled out a bag of money and handed it to Ray, telling him to take it home and buy necessities. Importantly, he had to bring back the receipts. Ray took the money, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He felt a feeling he couldn't quite describe. He ruffled Rose's hair, exclaiming that she had grown up faster than he thought. Rose was flustered after her brother messed up her hair. Another knock came at the door. A moment later, the door gently opened. It was Celine coming to see Rose. Seeing Celine, Ray quickly recognized her as Viscountess Lorraine. Celine formally introduced herself as Celine Lorraine. Ray, in turn, introduced himself as Rose's older brother, Ray. Looking at Ray, Celine immediately realized he was Rose's brother, as they looked remarkably alike. Ray agreed, mentioning that people often commented on them looking like twins. Rose found this a bit annoying. She was clearly the smarter sibling. Suddenly, she remembered a detail from the novel. Originally, Ray was supposed to fall in love with Celine at first sight, but that didn't seem to be happening. Another knock interrupted their conversation. Laudine entered and announced that the Empress requested a private meeting with the Duchess. Rose was to go see the Empress as soon as she was ready. Rose knew what was coming. It was time to discuss the engagement with the Empress. Seeing that Rose was busy, Celine excused herself. As for Ray, he seemed lost in thought. He gently took Rose's hand, telling her that the Empress's summons was undoubtedly about the marriage. Although rumors were swirling, if Rose didn't want to marry, she could refuse. Rose agreed with Ray's logic. Someone who could make the crown prince feel emotions had appeared, so the Empress could no longer stand idly by. Rose patted Ray's shoulder, reassuring him not to worry. She confessed that this was the thing that could make her the happiest. After receiving the Empress's message, Rose quickly prepared to meet her. She was certain the Empress would do anything to keep her close. Rose knew it could be dangerous, but she wanted to use this to her advantage. Upon meeting the Empress, Rose curtsied. The Empress immediately bade her rise. Having heard the absurd rumors, she asked Rose directly for confirmation. Rose confirmed without hesitation her ability to help the crown prince feel emotions. The Empress was astonished to discover the person she had been searching for was right beside her. Not long ago, she had also summoned Duke Garnet. The Empress had summoned him regarding Rose and the crown prince's marriage. While speaking with Ray, the Empress found him to be a warm and upright man. He stated he would only accept the marriage if the Duchess agreed. Initially, the Empress had other candidates for the crown princess besides Rose. But now, if Rose truly possessed the rumored ability, the Empress was determined to keep her. The Empress suddenly asked Rose what it would take to win her favor. Finally, the day had come. The Empress had laid out her terms. Rose feigned humility, pretending to be too humble to make demands of the Empress. She would endure until the Empress herself offered terms. The Empress found Rose more intriguing than she'd anticipated. She commended the Garnet siblings for their composure in the face of everything. Then, getting straight to the point, the Empress acknowledged the Garnet family's substantial debt. She promised to repay these debts and permanently exempt the Garnet territory from taxes. Furthermore, she offered Rose a luxurious carriage and 1,000 tera as a gesture of goodwill towards the marriage. This was equivalent to the value of a castle and a territory. If this were a dowry between families of equal standing, it would fill an entire house with carriages. But the other party was the Empress, for whom this sum was a mere grain of sand. Rose calculated, wondering if she should ask for more. The Empress seemed to anticipate Rose's thoughts. As the crown prince's fiancée, Rose would receive 10 sets of dresses and jewelry to maintain her dignity. Laudine, standing beside them, declared it the most lavish dowry in history. Rose simply bowed her thanks, thinking she would accept this for now and negotiate for more later. Just as the Empress thought the matter settled, Rose said she had something to discuss. Before they reached an agreement, the Empress readily agreed to listen. Rose brought up the prince's emotional state. It was crucial for his succession. Public opinion and the church were deeply concerned about it, and she knew it was troubling the crown prince. The Empress paused, and Rose continued, saying that if she had to demonstrate her abilities before them or do what was necessary, she would do her utmost. The Empress smiled, pleased. She praised Rose's cleverness. Laudine then brought forth a contract for the Empress to sign. The Empress believed that with Rose's help, Enoch would improve. Furthermore, Rose needed to make it clear to everyone that the Crown Prince now possessed emotions. That was Rose's role. As the contract was drawn up, the Empress expressed her reliance on Rose. With the agreement reached, Rose left the Empress's chambers. She found a bustling scene outside. According to Laudine, Rose could practice here for the investiture ceremony. Celine was also present. Seeing her, Rose inquired about the practice. Celine explained that they simply had to step forward and wait when the emperor called their names. The ceremony hall was magnificently decorated. The nobles were all present, captivated by the crown prince's beauty. Enoch's arrival, along with Jonah, illuminated the entire hall. The noble women were intrigued by the crown prince's appearance. Rose, however, felt a pang of dismay. The female lead, Celine, was here. If Enoch saw her, he might fall in love at first sight. This meant the fortune Rose hoped for would vanish. Just as she was contemplating how to handle this situation, Enoch spotted Rose. Without a word, he walked towards her. Their eyes met. Rose, finally snapping back to the present, curtsied to the crown prince along with Celine. Enoch, without much ado, expressed his desire to speak with Rose privately. The noble women were all envious. Rose, understanding the power of beauty, wasn't surprised. Celine, noticing Rose's expression, excused herself. Hearing this, Rose called for Jonah. She wanted him to protect Viscountess Celine. Though reluctant, Jonah agreed. Enoch suggested they go to the East Tower. Rose truly couldn't fathom what he was thinking. They walked in silence towards the East Tower. While strolling through the garden, Enoch inquired about the Empress's summons. Upon receiving her confirmation, he asked if she truly wanted to marry him. Rose replied, "Of course." Enoch, perplexed, asked why. Although Rose's true motive was wealth, she couldn't reveal her primary goal. Enoch didn't want to beat around the bush. He wanted to know her reasons. Suddenly, he sensed something. Someone was eavesdropping. Enoch murmured to Rose that they needed to move to the West Tower. There were reporters. Rose, remembering a previous dreadful experience, felt weary. She told Enoch to take her away. A reporter suddenly darted out, blocking their path. His actions were impulsive. Seeing Enoch's murderous glare, he stammered, unable to speak. Enoch, unwilling to argue, turned to Rose and, without a word, swept her into his arms. To her surprise, they successfully escaped the reporter. Enoch gently set Rose down. He wanted to continue their conversation. Rose, slightly dizzy from being suddenly scooped up, nevertheless insisted on speaking with Enoch. Seeing his genuine curiosity, Rose offered a flimsy reason. Since she had to marry, she wanted the best option. Besides, with her by his side, the crown prince would be seen as normal. Enoch reacted uncertainly to this, unsure if it was a good thing. He was still trying to process everything logically. He didn't need emotions. He only cared about demonstrating his power and authority. While troublesome, appealing to the masses with emotions didn't seem efficient. Rosen asked why the Empress hadn't stopped searching for the soul fragments. Enoch was speechless, staring at Rose like a robot. Rose pressed on, reminding him of his emotional reactions to the food. Did he consider those trivial? She proposed repeating the experience. Enoch leaned closer, accusing her of wanting to poison him. Rose was bewildered by his twisting of her words. They were unaware of being observed. The observer was enraged by the scene, perceiving Enoch as a rogue harassing Rose. Ray, unable to contain himself any longer, yelled out. Rose turned towards the source of the commotion. In the distance, Ray was furious, intent on using magic against Enoch. The wolves Ray summoned lunged at Enoch in an instant. Empowered by divine power, Enoch quickly sensed the approaching danger. A loud crash echoed as the water Ray summoned surrounded them. Ray was only concerned for his sister's safety. Rose assured him she was fine. It was her brother who was in trouble. Ray assumed Rose was worried about him, but she was actually worried about the current scene. Water was everywhere, and a sword appeared out of thin air. Ray realized with horror that he had attacked the crown prince. His anger dissipated, replaced by shame. Trying to defuse the tension, Ray introduced himself as Duke Charles. Enoch remained unimpressed. He noted the Charles siblings' aptitude for surprise attacks. As Ray attempted to explain, Enoch cut him off, asking directly if he was a commanding magician. He was puzzled, as Ray's name wasn't on the National Registry. Ray claimed he hadn't intentionally concealed it. Enoch was skeptical that Ray could hide such a thing. He grabbed Ray's hand. Ray felt the threat in Enoch's gaze. Seeing the situation escalating, Rose intervened. She suggested they talk somewhere else. The kitchen had prepared refreshments, so she invited them to continue their discussion over snacks. Enoch agreed. The three of them sat together, enjoying the refreshments. Rose felt awkward. The male lead and the second male lead were both present. Enoch mentioned the Charles siblings' failed assassination attempt. Rose started to explain, but Ray stopped her. He demanded to know why the crown prince was flirting with his sister. Enoch clarified, showing Ray the newspaper, pointing out that it was Rose who was doing the flirting. Ray froze. He couldn't believe his sister would do such a thing. Rose explained that they were, in fact, engaged, so it was perfectly normal. This confirmed her acceptance of the marriage proposal. Ray, worried about her future, was cut short by Enoch. Enoch inquired who knew about Ray being a commanding magician. Upon hearing that only 3 people knew, Enoch nodded in satisfaction. He proposed that Ray join his night order, effectively pardoning the attempted assassination. Ray was stunned, not expecting things to turn out this way. Enoch then feigned regret, stating his only other option was to confiscate Ray's title and arrest him for attempted regicide and concealing his identity. Ray, knowing what this would mean for his family, reluctantly but gratefully accepted Enoch's offer. Enoch amiably stated he would prepare the necessary documents. The matter was finally settled. Commanding magicians possessed immense power against monsters, akin to divine power. Moreover, Ray was a high-ranking commanding magician, a rank held by only one person in the entire nation. Ray might be even more powerful. A magic master of his caliber was said to be unique in the kingdom. Ray was a national treasure. Ray sheepishly told Rose he hadn't meant to keep it a secret. He had planned to tell her when the time was right. Looking at her dumbfounded brother, Rose expressed her understanding. To make amends, Ray offered to use his magic for household chores. Seeing his hesitation, Rose said she felt fortunate to have a brother with such abilities. Ray, knowing he was forgiven, brightened instantly. Enoch announced he would send the contract to the Charles household, dismissing Ray. Ignoring Ray's attempt to linger, Enoch explained that the royal family only allowed visits, not extended stays. Ray was speechless. Rose consoled him, promising they would meet again at the prince's birthday banquet. Though reluctant, Ray accepted the reality and departed. Left alone, Rose complained about her dramatic brother. She found his suggestion of writing letters absurd, given the short distance between the Charles household and the palace. Enoch, sipping his tea, agreed with Rose's sentiment. He, too, understood the feeling of exasperation. Rose remarked that this was the first time they had felt the same way. Enoch sensed something different, but he quickly brushed it aside, urging Rose to continue. When asked why she wanted to marry him, Rose explained her family's financial struggles, hoping the marriage would bring prosperity to the Charles family. In return, she would help Enoch experience emotions. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Enoch remained silent, then claimed understanding and stood to leave. When Rose questioned his departure, Enoch coldly asked if there was any reason for him to stay. Rose stated that as his future wife, it was natural to care for him. Enoch deduced that his mother and Rose had come to some sort of agreement. However, he hadn't agreed to the marriage yet, so it was merely a preliminary agreement between Rose and the Empress. Rose cheerfully gave him time to reconsider. Time passed. 3 days had gone by since the palace invitation. Tomorrow was the prince's birthday banquet. Palace staff worked tirelessly to ensure the event's success. Lady Anthony, seeing Rose in her gown, felt she seemed to have gained a little weight, but it wasn't a major issue. The accessories she had prepared would make everything perfect. Lady Anthony also brought out the bracelet Rose had asked her to find. Rose hesitated, then finally put on the bracelet containing the soul fragment. Lady Anthony commented that it was simple and suited the evening's attire. Time flowed. Elsewhere on the training grounds, the atmosphere was lively. Soldiers carried out their daily training. Princess Rose's appearance caused a brief distraction. Rose was here to find Jonah. Upon meeting him, she expressed her wish to see the prince. Her pleasant expression and melodious voice captivated the soldiers. It was their first time seeing Princess Charlotte in person. Far from being embarrassed, Rose was delighted by their reaction, deeming it normal for someone with her beauty. As Jonah scratched his head, unsure how to respond, footsteps approached. It was Enoch. Seeing him in his training attire, Rose found him incredibly handsome. She admired him, oblivious to Jonah's glare. Approaching Enoch, she indicated she needed to speak with him. Her eyes were fixed on him. His ruggedly handsome appearance was enough to make any girl swoon. Rose wanted to discuss his upcoming birthday party. She explained that her family's poverty prevented them from affording a suitable gift. The party, also a welcome-back celebration, would be a stage for blatant flattery from the nobles. Enoch understood the Duke's financial constraints made it difficult to compete with other gifts. This was precisely Rose's point. She had a proposition. Enoch said he was open to suggestions, as long as they didn't involve assassination. Rose declared she wouldn't give him any physical object. Instead, she would offer a different kind of gift. Enoch was intrigued. Rose leaned in closer, proposing a demonstration of his ability to feel emotions as her gift. Enoch raised a languid eyebrow. She intended to use this as a present. The sunlight made her smile even brighter. Rose was always agreeable when money wasn't involved. After a moment, Enoch grasped her meaning. She wanted him to act according to her instructions during the ceremony to prove his emotional capacity. When pressed for details, Rose insisted it was a secret to be revealed on the day itself. If she lacked money, she could offer something more valuable. In her mind, it was a brilliant plan. Noticing his skepticism, Rose promised he could arrest her if he felt threatened. Enoch said he would consider it. However, Rose didn't give him a chance to refuse, assuming his agreement. After their lengthy conversation, the sky shifted hues. The next day, the day of the party, Rose woke up early to prepare. Once the maids finished, she looked like a goddess. Despite her stunning appearance, Rose was in a poor mood due to lack of sleep. Celine entered. She expressed her anxiety about the upcoming ceremony. Rose expressed understanding, admitting her own nervousness. But her primary concern was the reward money. Laudine announced it was time. They headed to the party. The venue was spectacular, overflowing with food and drinks. Nobles chatted excitedly. Soft music played. All eyes were on the two beautiful princesses. Rose and Celine looked like characters from a classic novel. Rose basked in the attention. Suddenly, Jane appeared. She greeted both Celine and Rose. But Rose was distracted, searching for her brother. Learning that Ray hadn't arrived yet, Rose realized the story was deviating from the original plot. According to the original storyline, the Crown Prince and Ray should have their first encounter here. Seeing Rose's pensive expression, Jane asked if she was all right. Rose assured her she was fine, inwardly determined to stick to the original narrative. The head servant called for silence. His Majesty, the Emperor, had arrived. Everyone bowed. Once seated, the Emperor outlined the main purpose of the gathering. He intended to reward, in the presence of the Crown Prince, the two women who had saved his life. Rose and Celine were summoned. They curtsied respectfully. In recognition of their bravery, the Emperor bestowed upon Celine the title of Viscountess, much to her surprise. He also bestowed upon her a residence befitting her new title, along with servants and furnishings. Rose gaped. Originally, the Emperor had only gifted the residence, nothing more. Then came the moment Rose had been anticipating. Her reward. A mysterious chest appeared. This was her prize. Rose inwardly lamented the unfairness. Despite her disappointment, she plastered on a smile and accepted the chest. The Emperor complimented her hair ornament. Rose, still displeased, politely responded. With the hero rewarding ceremony concluded, the Emperor announced the most important award of the day. He summoned Enoch forward, introducing the true protagonist of the occasion. The Emperor acknowledged Enoch's hardships, praising his unwavering dedication. He bestowed upon Enoch a precious sword. He hoped Enoch would live up to the sword's glory. Enoch accepted the gift impassively. Rose realized the sword's ownership had changed. Receiving this sword signified recognition as the heir. Rose worried for Enoch, knowing he would face greater challenges from now on. The Emperor raised his glass, officially declaring the party commenced. As Rose enjoyed the refreshments, Ray appeared, complimenting her appearance. Jane and Celine also came to greet her. Ray thanked Jane for looking after Rose and rocking him. A scornful laugh echoed nearby. A pink-haired noblewoman criticized Ray's attire, mocking Rose's status as a mere fiancée. Rose heard everything. As Ray prepared to confront the woman, Celine intervened. Rose calmly continued eating, then noticed the Duke introducing his daughter to the Crown Prince. Rose quickly approached them. The Crown Prince's expression remained unchanged. until he saw Rose. Seeing her approach, Enoch asked her purpose. Rose pretended to wish him a happy birthday and mentioned having a special gift. Enoch expressed curiosity. Rose mentioned Enoch's reading about emotions and declared herself an expert on the subject. Therefore, she had prepared a gift related to emotions. She stepped forward, picked up a delectable pastry, and offered it to Enoch. Faced with her enthusiasm, Enoch's expression grew colder. He didn't understand what she was doing. Rose reminded him of their conversation yesterday. She wanted to give him a suitable gift. Enoch snatched the pastry and ate it, surprising Rose. This wasn't how she envisioned it. Enoch then took out a handkerchief and wiped Rose's hand. Rose tried to explain, but Enoch twisted her words. The onlookers were stunned, convinced they shared a special connection. Though different from her plan, Rose was pleased with the effect. She then suggested he feed her pastry. She wanted to showcase their emotional connection. Enoch thought they had done enough. Rose, unwilling to give up, continued explaining and advancing, while Enoch retreated. The crowd found this amusing, witnessing the prince's unusual behavior. Rose insisted it was a display of emotion, specifically a wife support. Enoch concluded he must hate wives. Rose tried to appease him, explaining it was just a feeling of being rejected, citing her expertise on emotions. Enoch ignored her, still refusing. He declared the gift received, ending the matter. As Enoch walked away, Rose felt panicked. She couldn't fail in front of the Empress. She refused to be so pathetic. Rose pretended to stumble, claiming dizziness. Enoch, sensing something, reached out and caught her. Everyone witnessed the romantic scene. They stood embraced, a tender tableau in the center of the grand hall. Enoch quickly regained his composure. Rose, ever quick-witted, explained that her stumble had been a calculated part of the plan, and his catching her, another element entirely. Enoch's expression darkened. Rose, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes, snatched a pastry and grumbled about his lack of understanding. As an expert in emotions, she only needed his trust to cure him, she declared. Watching her antics, a smile tugged at the corner of Enoch's lips, then erupted into full-blown laughter, leaving Rose bewildered. The crowd buzzed, a ripple of astonished murmurs spreading through the hall as they witnessed the prince's mirth. This party was unlike any other. The crown prince was openly laughing. A moment later, Rose joined in, her laughter echoing his. Enoch abruptly stopped, denying he had laughed in public. It was a misunderstanding, he claimed, his laughter stemming from a different source entirely. Seeing Rose eat, he explained, reminded him of a chipmunk, an image that always amused him. Rose noted the lingering smile on his face. Enoch feigned ignorance as to the reason for his amusement. Rose advised him to be honest with himself, to embrace his feelings. Suddenly, a thought struck Enoch. He found it curious that his mother intended to arrange a marriage with the Charles family. But why would the Charles family possess such influence? Rose calmly encouraged him to ponder the question, suggesting it was fate. Their meeting was destined. Enoch found the word fate intriguing. Ray appeared, calling out to Rose. He startled at the sight of the prince, bowing respectfully. Enoch, upon seeing him for the second time that day, commented on Ray's improved manners. Ray, concerned for his sister, wished to take her somewhere less crowded. Enoch waved them off, and Ray, with a gentle tug, led Rose away. The party continued to swirl around them. After being whisked away by Ray, Rose encountered Celine and inquired about Jane. Celine relayed Jane's words, explaining that this was the opportune time to observe the weaknesses of the nobles, as the festivities would continue for 3 days. Rose understood. Ray returned, bearing a plate piled high with pastries. Rose reminded him they weren't there to indulge in treats. She instructed Ray to meet her the following morning. The first day of the party drew to a close. The next morning dawned bright and sunny. Newspapers reported on Princess Rose, making the crown prince laugh. Rose was pleased with the outcome. A maid announced the arrival of Duke Charles. Ray, as instructed, had come. Rose was taken aback by his disheveled appearance. Concerned, she asked what had happened. Ray, dejected, explained that he had been ambushed by 100 reporters. Rose's expression turned serious. She led Ray off to acquire new attire. She pulled him into a changing room. Upon entering, they found Lady Anthony within. She turned, her gaze falling upon Rose and her brother. It was a fortunate coincidence. She had been looking for Rose. Lady Anthony's eyes shifted to Ray, her brow furrowing slightly as she wondered why he looked so dreadful. To save time, Rose requested Lady Anthony give Ray a makeover. She wanted to create a dazzling life for the second male lead. Lady Anthony readily agreed. She would transform Ray from an ugly duckling into a swan. Ray initially hesitated, but under Lady Anthony's enthusiastic encouragement, he acquiesced. Hours later, Rose, herself dressed impeccably, waited. Ray emerged, transformed by much effort, now strikingly handsome. Rose mused that Ray was most charming when silent. Rose's primary objective had been to make Ray attractive. Noble women now cast admiring glances in his direction. Rose preened, immensely satisfied by their appreciative gazes. A princess approached, greeting Ray and Rose politely. Her name was Dalton. Ray recognized her. She had been kind to him on several occasions. Dalton expressed her pleasure that he remembered her. Her gaze towards Rose, however, held a distinct chill. She complimented Rose's hairstyle, especially the jeweled hair ornament, which she predicted would become quite the fashion. Indeed, most of the noble women seemed to be sporting variations of Rose's hairstyle. Dalton abruptly shifted the conversation, suggesting that the Duke would be lonely after Rose married the prince. She offered to accompany him to the engagement ceremony. Rose, bewildered, agreed. Dalton, pleased, bid them farewell and departed. The party thronged, becoming ever more crowded. Rose noticed, tucked away in a corner, Celine and Jane in conversation. She remarked to Ray that Celine hadn't danced yet, a fact that surprised him. Celine, spotting the Charles siblings, made her way towards them. Rose warned Ray not to do anything foolish tonight. She also noticed that both Celine and Jane had adopted her hairstyle. She complimented them on it. Ray, summoning his courage, asked Celine for a dance. Celine, initially surprised, accepted. Their pairing was precisely the outcome Rose had hoped for. She wondered if altering the original story had been wise. But Enoch's soul was in her hands, and he hadn't fallen head over heels for Celine. Events were spiraling beyond her control, requiring her full attention. Jane, nearby, called out to Rose, inquiring about Dalton. Rose answered honestly, explaining that Ray had mentioned Dalton's helpfulness. Jane knew the Viscount Dalton family to be a polite family with a scholarly background. She had recently investigated the Daltons, finding their recent behavior odd, though she couldn't pinpoint the problem. Jane cautioned Rose against becoming too close to Dalton. Rose expressed her gratitude. Jane clarified that she spoke as a friend. Rose was touched. She confessed that she, too, desired Jane's friendship. Seeing her sincerity, Jane found Rose intriguing and wished to deepen their connection. Jane's parents arrived, forcing her to excuse herself. As the party began to wind down, it was time for Rose to make her move. She searched for the prince, who, predictably, drew attention wherever he went. Rose resolved to approach him. The party had grown even more congested. Amidst the boisterous atmosphere, before Rose could reach Enoch, a flurry of noble women rushed forward, eager to request a dance with His Highness. Faced with this throng of ladies, Enoch declared his disinterest in dancing. They persisted, relentlessly attempting to persuade him. At this, Enoch's patience wore thin, and he activated his demon mode in response. Enoch didn't want to waste his time on them. The noble women recoiled, intimidated by the prince's daunting glare. This scene was witnessed by Rose, who stood at a distance. She had anticipated such a reaction from the prince. Once the crowd dispersed, Rose approached and greeted the prince. Hearing the familiar voice, Enoch turned. The two stood a short distance apart, conversing. Seeing Enoch, Rose's first question concerned his well-being. She reasoned that if Enoch claimed illness, he could have avoided the situation. Enoch stared intently at Rose, smiling as he stated his dislike for lying. Rose found his response irritating. In front of everyone, she dramatically fainted into the prince's arms. Enoch caught Rose with one arm and summoned someone to escort her to the resting area. Then, turning to the onlookers, he smiled and urged them to continue dancing. Moments later, Enoch escaped the crowd's attention, finally speaking with Rose in the hallway. Rose suggested that Enoch should maintain a pleasant demeanor in public, as it wouldn't cost him anything. Enoch didn't address this point. He questioned Rose's sudden recovery after fainting. Rose honestly admitted to feigning her collapse. Under the bright moonlight, the two stood quietly, admiring the moon. Rose no longer wished to interact with the nobles inside. She confessed that her feigned faint was a ploy to gain Enoch's attention. Enoch was speechless. He gazed into the distance, lost in thought, before turning and walking away in silence. From his vantage point, he searched for someone, his eyes finally landing on Ray. Enoch called his name, beckoning him to follow. Ray, observing Enoch's demeanor, felt a flicker of confusion but obeyed nonetheless. Moments later, Ray found Rose in the hallway. He took her hand, his expression filled with concern. Enoch explained that Rose felt faint and needed to rest, entrusting her care to Ray. Ray was touched. He inquired after his sister's well-being. Surprised by Enoch's consideration, his perception of the crown prince shifted. Believing his sister was genuinely tired, Ray guided her towards a room. As Rose began to protest, she met Enoch's dismissive gaze. Resigned, she allowed Ray to escort her. The festivities were drawing to a close, and life would soon return to normal. 2 days later, Rose's heart was heavy. It was her last day at the Imperial Palace. The thought of leaving such luxury filled her with a pang of regret. According to regulations, Rose couldn't take any palace belongings with her. Despite her efforts, she was left with only a few small trinkets and 500 gold coins. Laudine urged Rose to hurry, as the Duke was waiting. Once Rose was ready, Ray arrived, noticing his sister's gloomy expression. Ray's worry deepened. Rose requested a brief conversation with the prince. Ray, taken aback, agreed. It was the final day of the festivities, and although the crowds had thinned, nobles still lingered. Rose was certain Enoch would be present. From Jonah, she learned that Enoch had been in the hall, but had left to attend to urgent matters. Observing Jonah's expression, Rose detected a lie. Having read the novel, she knew Jonah averted his gaze when he lied. Rose immediately called out Jonah's deception. Leveraging her role as an emotions expert, she pressured Jonah into revealing the prince's location. Rose's intentions were clear. She wouldn't leave empty-handed. Upon reaching the room, Rose knocked softly. Receiving no response, she entered. A peculiar scene unfolded before her. Enoch was bathed in sunlight, an aura of tranquility surrounding him. Rose quietly pulled a nearby chair and sat down. Observing Enoch, she contemplated the burdens he carried. Lost in thought, she sensed a hidden sadness within him. As she studied him, Enoch's eyes suddenly opened, startling Rose. She immediately straightened her posture and, flustered, began to speak. Enoch greeted her, his expression weary. When he inquired about the reason for her visit, Rose expressed her desire for them to see each other often in the future. Enoch tilted his head in confusion. Rose boldly declared that they were lovers, and therefore, frequent meetings were only natural. Enoch sighed, stating he was unaware of such a relationship. Rose mentioned the Empress, explaining that she was merely fulfilling their agreement. She abruptly stood, emphasizing her resolve. Then, bidding the prince farewell, she departed. Rose returned to the main hall. Ray was surrounded by noble women, captivated by his handsome appearance. Spotting his sister, he immediately suggested they leave. As the sky deepened to a crimson hue, the festivities concluded. The end of the day marked Rose's return to the Garnet estate. As the carriage pulled up to the gates, both Rose and Ray heard the familiar voice of their maid. Noting Verdi's urgency, Rose wondered what had happened. Verdi announced that a priest had been sent by the royal family for healing. Deeply concerned by Rose's recklessness, she couldn't believe Rose would take such a risk. Rose was touched by everyone's concern. The entire household rejoiced at their return. Ray and Rose were finally home again. Rose felt the warmth of their love and concern, grateful for a place she could truly call home. Back at the Garnet estate, she decided on a short respite before resuming her duties. Preparations for her upcoming business ventures were necessary. Though her past actions hadn't amounted to much, she was determined to make gradual improvements. Rose decided to use her funds to hire more staff, alleviating the extra work placed on Bart, the butler, and Verdi. Just then, a knock echoed from outside. Footsteps approached, and the newcomer introduced himself as Michael, a helper recommended by Jane. Upon reviewing his information, Rose learned he was an 18-year-old from the capital. His listed specialty, carrot farming. Michael explained that his family owned a carrot farm, passed down through generations, providing him with ample experience. Rose, delighted, instructed Bart to take Michael to the carrot fields. She was eager to witness Michael's carrot cultivating prowess. flawless. He was Jane's recommendation, and in Rose's eyes, Jane was an angel. With the staffing issue resolved, the remaining problem was far more thorny. The Garnet estate's debt. Rose reviewed the outstanding debts. Facing the relentless creditors, she had confronted them sternly, but to no avail. She learned the Garnet family's debt was colossal. The figure stunned Rose. There was also an additional sum borrowed by Ray, not yet included in the existing debt. Upon learning this, Rose glared at Ray. Ray, confronted with the harsh reality, reasoned that the creditors had shown kindness in lending him money during difficult times. Rose suppressed her fury. The more they discussed, the more debts surfaced. Documents piled up on the table. After careful calculations, the total, including principal and interest, exceeded 64,000 gold coins. In modern terms, it was a national-level debt. Rose could only afford 10,000 gold coins. The Queen had promised a check of 10,000 gold coins to settle the Garnet family's debts. Rose reluctantly handed the money over to the creditors. They agreed to extend the repayment period. They each left with 10 gold coins. Rose's heart sank. All the money she'd gained from the royal family was now gone, drained like a leaky faucet. Recalling the money given to her brother, Rose reminded Ray to be mindful of his spending, prioritizing necessities. The Garnet family was once again destitute. Rose followed Ray to a peculiar storage area. Strange items were displayed. Ray explained it was fertilizer. Not just any fertilizer, but a special kind from the blessed land. It could triple crop yields each season. Ray had already spread it throughout the Garnet estate. Rose's primary concern was the cost. Learning that Ray had spent 30 silver coins on it, Rose was speechless. Since it was already purchased, she accepted the situation. Suddenly, Rose noticed an object nearby. It looked like an egg. Curiosity prompted her to inquire. Ray explained he'd bought it at the market. The elderly vendor claimed it was a lucky egg, preserved for 300 years. Upon hearing of Rose's engagement, the vendor halved the price, so Ray bought it for 50 gold coins. He intended to gift it to Rose, blessing her with a happy marriage. Rose, furious, threw the egg to the ground, berating it as a scam. She needed a break, lest she be driven mad by her brother's extravagant spending. Avoiding Ray, Rose wandered through the gardens, weary. Despite the challenges, she was fortunate to possess the soul fragment. With it, any financial losses could be recouped. Michael appeared, having explored the nearby farmlands. He expressed his admiration for the Garnet estate. Like a gentle giant, he praised the land. The soil of Denry Farm was incredibly rare. He declared a hidden gem, perfect for cultivating a variety of crops. Rose listened intently. This was Rose's first time visiting the farm. The sight before her was astonishing. She hadn't realized the Garnet estate was so vast. Even the carrots were abnormally large. Rose examined the carrots closely, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Giant carrots meant giant potential. The next day, Rose, dressed in more suitable attire for exploration, returned to the gardens. The Denry region was originally inhabited by elves and dwarves. In the original story, this was the Garnet family farm, an undeveloped dwarven territory. It was a naturally fertile land. Lush trees, laden with ripe fruit, surrounded her. Rose recalled childhood memories of picking and eating fruit with Ray. She sampled an apple. She envisioned transforming this area, with Michael's help, into a thriving orchard. The fruit trees held immense commercial potential. Rose felt her luck beginning to turn. Sunlight dappled through the garden. After careful observation, Rose knew she couldn't let this opportunity slip away. She harvested a bounty of the delicious fruit. She resolved to begin working diligently the following day. The next day, Rose bid farewell to Bart and headed towards the gardens. Bart, puzzled by her unusual attire, inquired about the reason. Rose casually explained that she preferred comfortable clothing. Rose then proceeded to the gardens, pushing a cart. She looked like a country girl. She had prepared all the necessary gardening tools herself and began her work. After a while, the baskets were filled with succulent fruits. Looking at the baskets, Rose thought they were larger than she had anticipated. Based on the size and quality of the fruit, Rose surmised they must be valuable. She then wondered if she should head back. But for the sake of her livelihood, Rose decided to venture deeper into the gardens. After a considerable amount of time, Rose regretted her decision, as the path seemed excessively long. Seeing a banner hanging from a branch, Rose realized she had passed this spot before. But she deluded herself, continuing along the same path. After some more time had passed, darkness began to fall. and Rose still couldn't find her way out. When she saw the red banner again, she knew she was lost, and her spirit instantly crumbled. She began to wonder if she had wandered into a labyrinth. Ray had told her as a child not to enter the dwarves' forest, or she would get lost. Just as Ray had said, Rose was now lost in the forest, unable to find her way out. She refused to be trapped here forever. At this moment, a powerful will to survive surged through Rose. She was determined to escape the gardens. While Rose wasn't paying attention, something happened that caught her off guard. The night was pitch black, and Rose trembled as she looked at the creature before her. It was a small chipmunk. As Rose tried to compose herself, the nearby bushes rustled, startling her again. Fortunately, it was just some harmless small animals. Seeing they posed no danger, she breathed a sigh of relief. The forest at night was incredibly desolate. Rose only had a small knife for protection. She huddled in a corner, wary of her surroundings. Looking up at the stars in the sky, she thought that everyone back at the estate must be worried about her now. She vowed never to get lost again, because if she did, there might be no one to come looking for her. Just as Rose was feeling despondent, a light suddenly appeared. Rose was momentarily captivated by the lights. The tiny glowing dots twinkled, emanating from within the bushes. A gentle breeze stirred. Before Rose flowed an endless stream of light. She quickly recognized them as wolves. These were the wolves Ray had summoned earlier. As soon as Rose recognized the wolves, Ray himself appeared, seeing her brother before her. Rose's legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground. Silently, she thanked her lucky stars she was still alive. Overwhelmed by her brother's concern, she reassured him she was all right. Noticing her trembling hands, Ray gently placed his own over hers, offering comfort. He told her everyone had been worried sick, searching for her. They needed to get home quickly. Rose was deeply touched, though she longed for him to carry her back. She was also worried about the fruit she had just picked. Ever resourceful, Ray had the wolves pull the cart, while he effortlessly hoisted Rose onto his back. As they walked, Rose softly confided in her brother that this was the first time someone had come looking for her when she was lost. Because in her previous life in the modern world, Rose had also gotten lost. Her parents, preoccupied with work, had been less than understanding even after the police found her, attempting to shift the blame. In the end, with no one to help, Rose had to find her own way home. Upon her return, she was met with harsh scolding from her parents, blaming her for being late. Since then, she had vowed never to get lost again. Today was the first time Rose truly felt the warmth of family. She thanked Ray from the bottom of her heart. He flashed a brilliant smile, brushing it off, saying it was simply his duty to protect his little sister. Hearing this, Rose's eyes welled up. Just then, the others who had been searching also found Rose and Ray together. Seeing Rose's disheveled state, Verdi, the maid, rushed over, her face etched with worry. The butler and Michael were also overjoyed to see her safe. In that moment, Rose realized these people were her true family. Ray, standing beside her, sensed something was amiss. Rose's face flushed crimson, her vision blurring rapidly. And then she collapsed. Everyone present was shocked. They rushed to check on her. Despite the ordeal of the night, Rose had finally found her family. The next morning, everyone brought Rose back to the estate. That night, she was still exhausted. After a while, the doctor beside her gave his diagnosis. He said Rose had fainted from overexertion and just needed some rest to recover. Bax, the butler, standing nearby, reminded Rose to reduce her workload. Suddenly, the maid informed Bax that they had visitors. Upon leaving Rose's room, Bax asked Verdi who the visitors were. He learned from her that Viscountess Celine and Lady Jane had arrived. They had rushed over as soon as they heard Rose was ill. Seeing Rose, Celine couldn't help but choke back tears, while Jane expressed relief at her friend's gradual recovery. Fully recovered, Rose learned from Celine that they had heard about her illness from a newspaper article. Hearing this, Rose surmised some reporters were trying to exploit her for fame. After explaining everything to Celine and Jane, Celine's heart ached, imagining her friends struggling to make money. But what caught her attention even more was Rose's story about the giant fruits in the dwarf's garden. Rose shared her plans to sell the fruit to support her family. Suddenly, Jane suggested Rose sell the fruit at the temple. At first, Rose was a little puzzled, wondering why she should sell at the temple. Jane explained that because they were dwarven fruits, selling them at the temple before the rainy season would be incredibly valuable. They would be perfect for ceremonial use. Furthermore, Terra's followers had already arrived in the capital. In the original storyline, Enoch's ascension to the throne and the official conflict with the Holy See was a particularly intense segment. But now, with Rose as an expert in emotions, the plot had changed, so she just needed to handle things well to manage that part. Just then, Jay mentioned she'd heard Rose had borrowed money from the Merchant Guild. Rose, though puzzled, confirmed she had indeed borrowed from them. Hearing this, Jane's expression turned serious. She said the guild seemed suspicious. According to her investigation, it appeared someone was backing them. This was strange, as nobles were typically shrewd in all their dealings. They always sought to benefit themselves and were willing to engage in underhanded dealings behind other nobles' backs. This was why the rumors of someone supporting the guild were circulating. Rose found this suspicious and asked Jane to tell her if she learned anything else. At that moment, the door burst open. There, holding a bowl of carrot porridge, stood Ray, having made it for his sister. Upon seeing Celine and Jane, he politely greeted them. In their presence, Ray proudly declared he had personally prepared a nutritious meal for his sister so she could recover quickly. Impressed, Celine remarked on how fortunate Rose was to have such a caring brother. Standing beside them, Ray blushed slightly at the praise. He had put a great deal of effort into the dish, nearly setting the kitchen ablaze, and now he was being commended. Suddenly, Bax, the butler, appeared, informing Michael, no Ray, that it was time for him to attend to his duties and he needed to go to his study quickly. Knowing her brother was worried about her, Rose reassured him she was fine, urging him to focus on his work. Just then, Verdi, the maid, rushed in. Seeing her panicked expression, Rose anxiously asked what was wrong. Verdi, trying to compose herself, announced the crown prince had arrived. Both Ray and Rose were taken aback. They couldn't believe the esteemed crown prince would come to the Garnet estate. Rose's mind raced with questions. The crown prince's carriage pulled up outside. Upon seeing Enoch, Rose and everyone present offered the appropriate courtesies. The prince's expression remained unchanged as he approached Rose. He simply walked closer and then relayed a decree from the queen. Initially confused, Rose nevertheless knelt to receive the decree. The Garnet family was one of the loyal families who had contributed to His Majesty the Emperor. Now, the queen would bestow upon the lady of the Garnet family a deserved reward. Rose felt a flicker of excitement at the mention of a reward. After Enoch bade her rise, their eyes met briefly in a rather awkward moment. Outside, the servants were arranging the gifts bestowed by the queen. Rose then asked Enoch why he had come. Glancing quickly at Ray, Enoch stated he had come for the Duke of Garnet, who had been absent without notice. Ray nervously explained that he had been worried about his sister and therefore couldn't report immediately. Uninterested, Enoch waved away his explanation. He then ordered Ray to go and see Celio first. Ray, reluctant to leave, told his sister to take care of herself. Once Ray departed, only Enoch, Rose, Celine, and Jane remained in the room. Enoch indicated he had something to say. Hearing this, Rose had no choice but to prepare tea to entertain him. After a while, Verdi, the maid, finally had everything ready. The side dish was fittingly carrots. Celine recognized Rose's signature dish the moment she saw it. Jane, sitting beside her, decided to try the crisp carrots and found them even more delicious than she'd anticipated. Rose, knowing the Denry carrots were exceptional, proudly offered them around. The carrot dish quickly became a favorite. Just then, Enoch spoke up. He softly called Rose's name and then asked if she had recovered. This simple question stunned both Celine and Jane, who sat beside Rose. Even Rose herself couldn't quite believe her ears. It took a few seconds for her to process his words. Utterly shocked, Rose had never expected the usually emotionless prince to inquire about her health. Faced with Enoch's question, Rose was momentarily speechless, but she politely replied that she was fine, just a little faint from exhaustion. Her response was met with silence, making the atmosphere even more awkward. Sensing the tension, Jane and Celine quickly excused themselves, saying that Rose was clearly recovering and they should take their leave. As soon as they left, only Rose and Enoch remained in the room. Rose wasted no time in asking Enoch if there was something urgent he needed to discuss. Enoch seemed momentarily taken aback by her directness, but he quickly regained his composure. He explained that the queen had requested he personally inquire about her well-being. Hearing this, Rose felt a slight sense of relief. Then, Enoch brought up the contract between the queen and Rose. He knew Rose was an expert on emotions, and he was curious to know her opinion of him. After their earlier interaction, this question genuinely flustered Rose. She replied that she was an expert on emotions, not a fortune teller, and couldn't possibly guess. This answer left Enoch momentarily speechless. He wanted to know how Rose had managed to persuade the Holy See. Rose replied that it was only because of Enoch that she was able to do so. She clasped her hands together, saying that when two hands meet, they make a sound, so if they work together, they would surely be very successful. Enoch didn't quite understand. Rose then mentioned the Chavin couple, but the prince still wore a puzzled expression. He had never heard of them, and was certain no one in the world knew of this couple. Rose explained that in political marriages, there was usually no love at the beginning, but the Chavin couple fell in love at first sight. Rose knew there was no Chavin couple. She was simply trying to give Enoch an example to understand. Sure enough, after hearing this, Enoch asked Rose how he could develop feelings in a relationship. Rose was a little taken aback by this question. She hadn't expected Enoch to be so forthright. Now, the story she once remembered so clearly seemed to be fading from her memory. Rose felt truly bewildered, as though something strange was happening. She tried to compose herself by changing the subject. Rose believed that gaining the support of the Holy See was more than just one job. Persuading the Holy See could solve everything. She believed Enoch could do it, but at this moment, she was wrestling with a jumble of confused memories, unsure how things would turn out. Enoch watched Rose's expression for a moment. Then he moved closer to her, just as Rose was wondering what he was doing. Enoch reached out and touched her forehead, asking with concern if she was feeling unwell, as she didn't look well. His sudden solicitude sent a blush flooding Rose's cheeks. She yelped and pulled back, refusing to let Enoch touch her again. She was completely baffled by Enoch's recent behavior. Seeing this, Enoch said he was merely trying to heal her. Hearing this, Rose felt a pang of frustration. She took Enoch's hand, telling him he only needed to touch her gently, like this. Enoch stood there, stating he had never done such a thing. Rose decided that from now on, they would learn how to shake hands like this. As soon as she finished speaking, Enoch reacted, unable to suppress a chuckle. This action surprised even Enoch himself. He truly didn't understand why he always found conversing with Rose so amusing. Turning, Enoch asked if he should proceed with Rose's plan now, but Rose simply reminded him of her contract with the queen. Hearing this, Enoch nodded, saying he understood. Though unsure of Rose's intentions, Enoch said he would visit again, and he hoped Rose would tell him about her health then. At this, Rose suggested she would report to the palace, as that way she and Enoch could arrange a private meeting. They would meet where no one could follow them. The next day, Rose decided to visit the temple. She went with Michael. The two rode in a carriage, so they arrived quickly. This was Rose's first time seeing the temple. A person noticed their arrival and immediately approached, inquiring about their identities. As soon as Rose lowered her hood, the girl instantly recognized her. This was the legendary Lady Garnet with the purple hair. Rose explained she had come because she had something to show the temple. As soon as she opened the cloth bundle, the girl gasped at the incredibly fresh fruit. Not wanting to make things difficult, the girl led Rose and Michael to where they needed to go. As soon as she touched the fruit, she immediately declared she would buy them for the temple. Hearing this, Rose was delighted. She stated she would donate a portion of the money to support the temple. At this point, Rose had earned a total of 100 gold coins, and seeing this money, she was ecstatic. At that moment, Rose silently thanked Jane for helping her discover a way to earn more money. Rose and Michael completed their task. After Enoch left that day, Rose began looking for ways to increase her income. Today, Michael and Rose's destination was this place. As soon as they entered, the doorbell outside chimed, alerting the shopkeeper to a customer. Seeing Rose, the shopkeeper enthusiastically recommended a camera, but Rose immediately requested the cheapest one. The cheapest camera turned out to be secondhand, and the shopkeeper had one for 30 gold coins, which Rose quickly agreed to. A moment later, she eagerly asked if camera repairs were free. Hearing this question for the first time, the shopkeeper naturally said no. This answer left Rose a little disappointed. Today, she had earned money and bought a camera. As Rose and Michael were talking, someone nearby was observing them. After a moment, this person approached Rose, saying he had a few questions to ask. As soon as Rose saw him, she recognized him as a reporter. Rose guessed this person might have been following her for a long time. Just as he was about to get closer, Rose quickly called for Michael, asking him to step forward and protect her. Seeing Michael's imposing figure, the reporter realized he was no match. Being stopped angered the reporter. He angrily exclaimed that he just wanted to ask a question. His outburst attracted the attention of those nearby. A moment later, a figure appeared. Baron Harris arrived and immediately threatened to arrest the suspicious reporter. The reporter tried to argue that he was just a reporter. Hearing this, Harris declared he had enough evidence to arrest him, as journalistic activities were prohibited in this area, without royal permission. Realizing his mistake, the reporter reluctantly left. At this moment, Rose stepped forward to greet Baron Harris. He glanced at her briefly, immediately recognizing her as Lady Kane. The two continued their conversation normally. Rose knew that without him, she could never have reached Rockingham. The final piece of the soul puzzle didn't belong to her, but to Celine. Suddenly, the Baron sighed. He wished Rose would tell His Highness not to let reporters come here, as they were always lurking around the area. Harris had been working night shifts for several days straight. Rose, feeling guilty, agreed to relay the message. After chatting with Harris for a while, Rose decided to return to the estate. Upon arriving, the butler, Bart, informed her of some news. The news made Rose incredibly excited. Valuable gifts had been delivered to the Kane estate. That evening, Rose spent time dealing with the gift boxes. She personally unwrapped the precious gifts. The first was a valuable pen. The next gift Rose opened even made her gasp in amazement. It was a golden bear. She felt fortunate that it wasn't just an ordinary teddy bear. At that moment, Rose, brimming with excitement, opened the second gift. The second gift did not disappoint. The entire box was filled with gleaming gold bars, accompanied by a note. These gift boxes came from upper-class, noble families. They sent these gifts to bribe Rose. As someone who had never experienced anything like this, Rose felt a little thrilled at that moment. Although Rose's engagement was a little late, people had already begun to flatter her. Rose extinguished the fire in the furnace. She followed a path to a mysterious place, leaving the unopened gifts behind. This was just the beginning. After sending Ming to the royal palace, the next day was scheduled as a meeting day. The Crown Prince's first date finally arrived. At Rose's request, they went to an aristocratic cafe with an outdoor view. In the refreshing outdoor atmosphere, Enoch felt that Rose seemed happier than usual today. Rose also mentioned that she was delighted to see the Crown Prince. In fact, since this was their first date, she was a little excited. Back in Korea, she was always busy making money and had no time to date her boyfriend. But since this was a romance novel, Rose decided to showcase her professional dating skills. To Rose's question about his work, Enoch replied that he had been busy attending successor classes. Hearing this, Rose was a little surprised. Enoch was studying law to inherit the throne. At this time, Rose told Enoch about a secret dream of hers. It was to build a building in Denry. But Enoch immediately shattered her dream, saying that it was illegal in Denry if it was for commercial purposes. Left with no choice, Rose had to sell the family estate. Now she was supporting a brother who was like a rabbit, their daily staple being carrots. The misfortunes didn't stop there. Ray was also in debt and unable to pay everyone's wages. They lived by supporting each other. It would be great if she could build a house for multiple families to live in, so the housing problem would be solved and Rose wouldn't have to pay rent. Enoch listened repeatedly, still feeling that this was for Rose's personal gain. From his experience, Enoch knew that the land in Denry was tax-free, so Rose's intentions were obvious. When Enoch didn't show any sympathy, Rose was deeply frustrated. Instead, he was surprised when she shared these things with him. Unafraid, Rose was determined to change His Highness's mind. Facing the cold Enoch, Rose didn't hesitate to express her burning love for him. She feigned cuteness, hoping to melt his heart. Just when Rose thought Enoch had fallen in her love trap, his face remained expressionless. He touched his chest, as if checking something. This action didn't escape Rose's notice. Just when Rose thought Enoch would agree to her plan, he uttered a sympathetic remark, shattering all of Rose's illusions. At that moment, Enoch felt deep pity for Rose. He realized that this feeling might be sympathy for someone. Because of Enoch, the atmosphere became silent and continued to remain silent. Left with no choice, Rose changed the subject by ordering more food. The two chatted for a while until nightfall. Enoch thoughtfully escorted Rose all the way back to the estate. As she alighted from the carriage, out of courtesy, Rose asked Enoch if he would like to enter her estate, but due to work, Enoch had to politely decline. Hearing this, Rose cheerfully bid him farewell. The two parted ways there. After the carriage had left for a while, Rose couldn't help but smile to herself. A moment later, she called out to Ming, who had been hiding in the corner. She asked him if he had taken the photos as instructed, and Ming had done exactly as Rose requested. With the newly purchased camera, he had captured the moments of Rose and Enoch standing together. According to Rose, this would become their new source of income. In a secret room within the estate, the entire place was bathed in red light. Rose planned to turn this room into a darkroom for photo development. Despite some challenges due to the different era, Rose still had some knowledge of photo development, because during her time in Korea, she had learned how to develop photos. Unlike modern times, in this era, photos were developed by taking out the memory stone from the camera and then touching printing paper and transferring the light. The image would be imprinted on the paper. Seeing the clearly captured photos, Rose silently admired Ming's talent in photography. At first, Rose had been a little worried about whether Ming could take good pictures, but seeing him so diligent when taking pictures, Rose concluded he had a talent for this work. Looking at these money-making photos in her hand, Rose couldn't help but burst into laughter. Soon she would receive a large sum of money from the newspaper company, because for a long time, no newspaper had published any new photos of her and the Crown Prince. If Rose sold these photos to the newspapers, she would make a lot of money. The photos were clean and perfectly developed. Now, Rose only needed to find a newspaper company and someone to represent her in selling the photos. Rose had already chosen the person to handle this matter. Today, Rose invited Baron Harris to discuss this matter. Upon hearing Rose's plan, Baron Harris was a little curious as to why she chose him. Rose, of course, had calculated and researched the price beforehand. If Harris sold the photos for 10 gold coins, he would receive 1 gold coin as commission. After all, this wasn't illegal. While it was illegal for reporters to enter a noble's private territory without permission, paying a noble to enter and take pictures was another matter. To be cautious, Rose avoided including any photos of Enoch. Besides, even if Harris was just a supervisor, he was busy keeping people quiet. So this was a reasonable proposition for him. Harris only needed to sign the contract and the deal would be done. As a money-loving man, the Baron couldn't miss this golden opportunity, so he eagerly signed. Seeing the deal completed, Rose stood up and formally said to Harris. With a sincere expression, she declared that they were now solid business partners. Though a little awkward at Rose's behavior, Harris, though a little awkward at Rose's forthrightness, readily agreed to the partnership with a handshake. Afterward, the work proceeded smoothly. Meanwhile, Enoch was busy managing the nights and attending his heirs' classes, but he still made time to meet with Rose whenever she requested it. Each would do their own thing. Rose would eat, while Enoch focused on his studies. As long as the meetings continued, Rose's source of income remained stable. She continued to sell hot news about herself to the newspapers. Lately, Rose and Harris's collaboration had been going very well, with money flowing in steadily. Just when everything was progressing smoothly, a problem arose during Rose and Enoch's meeting today. Rose lost her composure the moment she heard Enoch's words. For a moment, her expression darkened as she listened to what the Crown Prince had to say. Enoch himself seemed to sense something was amiss, so he suggested postponing their public meetings for the time being. For Rose, this was a cruel suggestion. Without the meetings, her financial opportunities would be cut off. From the recent articles about the two of them, suspicion had arisen on Enoch's side. He was certain he had carefully chosen locations where reporters couldn't access, yet somehow, news of their dates was all over the newspapers. Enoch found this highly suspicious. While the photos weren't official, they still slightly infringed on their privacy. To this, Rose simply gave a nervous laugh, unaware that Enoch had been observing all her actions. Setting that aside, he informed her that their engagement was being postponed as the emperor hadn't given his approval yet. If the public continued to discuss the matter, the imperial family would certainly not stand idly by, and they couldn't risk angering the court over this. Hearing this, Rose thought that ultimately they would get married anyway. The issue with the imperial family was just a matter of time. Enoch pondered Rose's words. He agreed with her perspective. For a moment, it seemed the two of them were on the same page. Enoch's gaze sharpened, making Rose, who was sitting beside him, feel a little nervous and frightened. She felt guilty, unable to meet his gaze directly. Just as Rose was trying to compose herself, Enoch sighed beside her, softly agreeing with her words. He realized that perhaps he had been overthinking things. Rose, at a loss for words, could only offer the consolation that everyone felt that way sometimes. This time, Enoch decided to enact a new law. At first, Rose didn't think much of it when she heard this, but a second later, she sensed something was amiss. Enoch promptly summoned his aide, who arrived shortly after. Rose was curious to know what was happening. Enoch called his chief aide to his side and began issuing commands, announcing the new law he had just conceived. He felt that some reporters were deliberately following the Duchess's recent activities, as the newspapers were filled with photos of their dates. If this continued, it would be highly inconvenient. Hearing this, Rose quietly murmured that she hadn't found it inconvenient at all. But Enoch seemed not to hear her. He declared a law that, from now on, any images of either Enoch or Rose appearing in the newspapers must have the consent of both of them. If anyone dared to take pictures without permission, it would be considered illegal. This law would apply to everyone. At that moment, Enoch had to thank Rose, for it was because of her that he was able to enact this new law. Outwardly, Rose pretended to be happy for the prince, but inside, she had gone cold. Since that fateful day, the prince passed the law regarding personal privacy rights. As expected, it immediately received the emperor's approval. The imperial family supported the new law, but most of the newspapers were furious, as this was unfavorable to them. However, the most furious person in this situation was Rose. She angrily ripped her clothes to express her frustration. From now on, all her income and savings were gone. Just as her anger was burning, a maid informed her of Lady Celine's visit. Though irritated, Rose still maintained her manners and went to greet her guest. There was a cluster of small trees at the gate of the mansion. Upon seeing Celine, the girl greeted her with a bright smile. Celine said she had brought some fruit trees as a gift for Rose. Today, if Rose planted these trees on her land, she wouldn't need the dwarf's garden anymore. Rose hadn't expected Celine to remember this. Faced with Celine's eager request, Rose agreed to join her in gardening. In truth, ever since she had started receiving bribes and other income, Rose hadn't cared much about selling fruit. But Rose couldn't refuse Celine, who had come today dressed in proper gardening attire. Celine's hopeful eyes were impossible for Rose to resist, so she joined Celine in her gardening endeavors. The weather today was perfect for gardening. Today, Rose became a farmer. She felt a little out of place, as Celine was in an unexpectedly serious mode. Her face was flushed with excitement as she diligently dug the soil. Despite Maid Verde's objections, Celine insisted on doing the hard work. She had come here today for this very purpose. Seeing Celine's enthusiasm, Rose spurred herself on a plant the trees quickly. Just as the shovel hit the soil, Celine seemed to notice something unusual. Rose, seeing her strange movements, also took notice. Celine had found something beneath the soil. She dug further. Upon unearthing it, they discovered a wooden box. Both were extremely curious, so Celine decided to open the box to see what was inside. As soon as the wooden box was opened, its contents shocked Rose. It was a gold bracelet. While Rose had been digging up dirt and rocks, Celine had unearthed gold on her first try. Suddenly, Rose realized something odd. Strange symbols were engraved on the bracelet. Celine guessed it might belong to a certain race, most likely related to the Garnet family. Celine thought Ray might know something about the bracelet, so she handed the bracelet to Rose. At first, Rose hesitated, as it was Celine who had discovered it. But Celine felt deep down that the bracelet belonged to the Garnet family, as it had been dug up on their land. Hearing this, Rose felt like the person before her was an angel. For the first time, she warmly held Celine's hand and sincerely expressed her gratitude. At that moment, Celine curiously asked Rose what she planned to do with the bracelet. As the day's work was done, Rose decided to chat with Celine in the nearby fields. The weather was beautiful today, perfect for nobles to enjoy tea and refreshments. Suddenly, Celine handed Rose a letter. It was a letter Jane had asked her to pass on to Rose. Jane planned to invite Rose to a party at the mansion and had sent her an invitation. Upon receiving the letter, Rose felt a little flustered. This would be her first time attending such an event. Though it felt a little strange, she had to go, as her income from the private pictures was gone. Rose needed to create a new source of income through her noble connections. After chatting for a while, they said their goodbyes. Afterward, Rose decided to go shopping to prepare some things for the party. Arriving at Lady Anthony's dress shop, Rose was surprised by the large number of customers. Almost all the noble ladies wanted to have their dresses tailored. Observing the noble women's appearances, Rose noticed they all sported naturally flowing braids. Just then, a familiar figure appeared. Upon hearing of Rose's arrival, Lady Anthony herself came to greet her. As her prized asset, Rose received exceptionally special treatment. Considering Lady Anthony's arrangements, Rose felt a bit perplexed. Lady Anthony explained that she had made special preparations for Rose. After entering a private room, Lady Anthony told Rose about her recent influence. In truth, the dress shop had many competitors, but thanks to Rose, the shop had become a unique brand. Consequently, customers had been flocking to the shop recently. They came for Rose's natural style fashion. This was the first time Rose had heard of such a defining style. As for Lady Anthony, due to the immense benefits she had gained from Rose, she was willing to offer lifetime free service. With that, she instructed an employee to bring something over. Lady Anthony had decided to give Rose a gift. It was a platinum bracelet. Lady Anthony had noticed Rose always wore that particular bracelet, so she guessed it must hold significant meaning for Rose. From Rose's simple explanation, Lady Anthony confirmed the bracelet she wore was indeed profound. But deep down, Lady Anthony felt her elegant bracelet was more suitable for Rose. Then, taking a deep breath, she introduced her own bracelet, stating the gem was designed for nobles. Hearing this, Rose stated she would cherish the item. After all, it was a free platinum bracelet. How could she refuse? Seeing Rose's gentle demeanor, Lady Anthony sensed a vast difference between the rumors and Rose's true character. She expressed that she knew Rose could be confrontational, but still wanted to show her something. It was an article titled "Shocking Encounter." The article claimed that Rose proclaimed herself a psychology expert, and there was also some information regarding the royal engagement. Rumors suggested Princess Kanye was scheming to get close to the crown prince. Of course, Lady Anthony wouldn't believe such rumors. What Lady Anthony cared about were Rose's feelings. Rose appeased her by explaining the engagement was initiated by the Queen and that the union was only a matter of time. Hearing this, all of Lady Anthony's doubts dissipated. Between Rose and the newspapers, she chose to believe Rose. Putting that aside, the two continued their discussion about fashion and dresses. After a considerable amount of time, Rose finally chose a dress. Now all that remained was to wait for the day of the party. Rose was busy taking care of the remaining tasks. As she focused on her work, Maid Verdi asked Rose if she had chosen an escort. Rose planned to go alone, though she had hoped to attend with her brother. However, Ray had been caught up in royal training as soon as he received the invitation and wouldn't be able to attend. When Rose mentioned she would go alone, Ray protested, saying he wanted to accompany her, but ultimately, it was just empty talk. Ray couldn't go. Maid Verdi then suggested the crown prince. As soon as these words were spoken, Rose dismissed the idea. She clearly remembered that it was because of him she was now so impoverished. Therefore, Rose was determined not to attend the party with him. On the day of the party, the carriage arrived at the gate. Maid Verdi and Butler Buck personally came to see the princess off. Today, Rose wore the dress she had chosen at Lady Anthony's shop. She was so beautiful it was hard to look away. After bidding farewell to the two, she leisurely stepped into the carriage and headed towards the party venue. After a long journey, they finally arrived at the Garnet Mansion. This family was known for its high prestige. Therefore, every noble wanted to attend this party. This would be Rose's chance to expand her network. As she arrived at the mansion gates, the sun began to set. Inside, the party was already underway. Everyone was engaged in lively conversation. Celine was chatting with other nobles. Suddenly, she noticed something. Seeing that signature violet hair, Celine immediately recognized Rose. Rose's appearance today astonished Celine and everyone present. Rose looked flawless. The boisterous atmosphere of the party was momentarily silenced by Rose's beauty. At that moment, she earned a new title, the Fairy Queen. Celine stood to the side, bashfully admiring the fairy-like beauty. Just then, the host of the party emerged. Jane, with a touch of arrogance, greeted Rose. When Jane inquired about the delay, Rose explained that her brother, Ray, would arrive a little later due to pressing work commitments. She promised to rejoin everyone once he had completed his tasks. Jane had no choice but to announce the official start of the party. Now, Celine, Rose, and Jane had a chance to converse with each other. Through Jane's words, Rose realized the young ladies here were all following the fairy style, melting their icy hearts. After criticizing Rose for being too ordinary in the past, Jane also mentioned that these individuals were all imitating her fairy hairstyle. At the mention of the phrase, icy hearts, Rose couldn't help but think of that cold man, Enoch. Jane mentioned that Rose's image had become quite popular recently, and her fashion choices were being emulated. Jane expressed her anticipation for Rose to showcase more interesting styles in the future. Hearing this, Rose sensed that Jane wanted to do business with her. Just as Rose suspected, Jane did indeed intend to collaborate with her. At that moment, a figure appeared. This person first greeted Jane and then expressed his gratitude for the invitation. After finishing his second sentence, he turned to look at Rose. The young man was captivated by Rose's beauty. Seeing Rose standing nearby, he intended to greet her. A blushing, shy young man stood before Rose. Rose felt a bit curious about him. After introductions, she learned his name was Theo. He expressed his pleasure at meeting Princess Kanye, and Rose responded with a polite smile. Inwardly, she seethed with frustration as Theo had interrupted her conversation with Jane about a business collaboration. She had intended to speak with Jane privately, but Theo had disrupted everything. Just then, another figure appeared. Seeing this person, Jane gasped in surprise. She hadn't expected the crown prince to appear here. Apparently, the Garnet family hadn't intended to invite him due to his busy schedule. The crown prince confidently scanned the crowd, striding towards where Rose stood. Then he stopped before her. Their eyes met, the crown prince gazing at Rose for a long moment. The next moment, before Rose could quite grasp what was happening, he took her hand. He gently kissed the back of her hand, his eyes filled with genuine charm. The young ladies present were completely captivated by this scene. In front of everyone, Enoch displayed his intimacy with Rose. He proved to everyone that he, too, could feel emotion. Rose was taken aback by Enoch's appearance in this manner. Smiling for what felt like the first time on his own accord, Enoch explained to her that he was late due to work. As Enoch held Rose's hand, her own became increasingly sweaty with mortification. She felt it was a bit unreal, as she hadn't summoned him as he implied. Just then, the head of the Garnet family appeared. Seeing the crown prince, they respectfully greeted him according to etiquette. Enoch proactively stated that he had come at Duke Can's invitation, and therefore was a bit impolite. The head of the Garnet family replied that it wasn't impolite at all. For the crown prince, such invitations were meaningless. The young ladies were abuzz with excitement over Enoch's arrival. Rose silently observed from the sidelines. Just as she had predicted, the moment Enoch arrived, everyone flocked to him. Just as Rose was feeling lost in the shuffle, a familiar figure appeared once more. Theo stood before Rose again. He expressed his desire to protect her. With the crown prince present, the party was quite lively. Everyone's attention was focused on Enoch. Only Rose and Theo stood off to the side, observing. At this moment, Theo decided to comment on the crown prince's appearance. However, his words only received perfunctory responses from Rose. The silence between them only made Theo more awkward. He then extended his hand, inviting Rose to dance, hoping to close the distance between them. Faced with his enthusiastic invitation, Rose truly didn't know how to respond, because she simply didn't know how to dance. Enoch, standing nearby, noticed this awkward situation. Therefore, he stepped in front of Theo and called out to Rose. Enoch formally invited Rose to dance with him. Seeing this, Theo understood what was happening and, although a little disappointed, stepped back. Although Rose pouted in dissatisfaction, she accepted Enoch's invitation. Today's party was especially unique. Accompanied by romantic music, Rose and Enoch walked hand in hand. Knowing that Rose wasn't skilled at dancing, Enoch gestured for her to simply follow his lead. The two danced together to the romantic melody. While dancing, Enoch mentioned that Rose hadn't replied to his letters for a week. Although the reason was her dislike for his face, to protect herself, she simply said it was to keep an eye on him. Rumors about them not meeting would stir up public opinion. This was part of Rose's plan. Hearing her complicated explanation, Enoch felt a bit perplexed. Was Rose doubting the sincerity of the royal cooperation? As soon as the words left his mouth, Enoch shifted his posture, nearly stepping on her foot. Facing his icy expression, Rose felt a bit angry and dissatisfied. At that moment, Enoch said she was almost caught. Rose felt annoyed that Enoch kept bringing up the past. Suddenly, she seemed to find an opportunity, attempting to step on Enoch's foot. But she failed, caught red-handed. Despite this, Rose was determined to retaliate. However, her attempt to step on him didn't hurt Enoch, but instead left Rose breathless. Noticing this, the Crown Prince reached out and swiftly swept Rose into his arms. The heroine, utterly embarrassed by Enoch's action, blushed crimson. The two interacted intimately, unaware that everyone around them was watching. At that moment, Rose really wanted to get down, as she was incredibly embarrassed. She could only explain that she had never intended to step on Enoch's foot. Despite the somewhat misleading explanation, Enoch put Rose down. The moment her feet touched the ground, she received envious gazes from everyone present. They thought the scene was incredibly romantic. To achieve her goals, Rose could only feign a shy smile. Seizing the opportunity, she asked Enoch why he was here. Enoch, maintaining his calm expression, said that Ray had asked him to come. As soon as he spoke, Rose knew he was lying. Her brother would never ask Enoch to take his place if he couldn't attend. At this moment, Enoch spoke up. He suggested they go somewhere to talk privately.